Hello and welcome to yet another video. This is the first episode of the story where Madara devised a plan. The Yondaime ruined things. Madara devised another plan. One that could never fail. But even the best laid plans of mice and men can go awry, and this one had just run into Konoha's most surprising ninja, Uzumaki Naruto. This story is from Arun 2110. Please support him, her. Please like and subscribe to show your support. Let's get the show started. It was a little past sunrise, the day after the preliminaries, and Team 7 were dutifully seated on the ground before their sensei. Ninja whose morning runs took them through or near Team 7's training ground goggled at the sight of the infamous Kapinin with his team so early in the morning. Of course, the passers-by did not know that Kakashi had set the meeting at 4 and showed up only a few minutes earlier. "It's a pleasant morning and I see that my little urchins are full of vim and vigor," the Jounin said jovially, flipping a page of his precious book. It was just bright enough for him to read his favorite porn without trouble. Team 7 grumbled. They'd stupidly believed that their teacher would show up on time just this once and had roused themselves up in the wee hours of the night to make the rendezvous. "So, what's the first item on the itinerary?" Kakashi smiled beatifically, ignoring the grumbles. If the brats were too stupid to understand his tardiness so many months after training under him, it was not his problem. They were supposed to look underneath and divine motives, after all. And this was one test they'd failed miserably. "The AAR?" Sakura asked. "Yep," Kakashi said, flipping a page. "We will start with Sasuke first. I faced off against Inuzuka Kiba and his dog. Kiba's a taijutsu specialist who works closely with his pooch. I knew going in that I was up against two opponents. Doesn't take a genius to figure that out," Naruto commented from the side, evoking a guffaw from Sakura. Sasuke glared at the blonde but seeing as how the Uzumaki was ignoring him, turned to Kakashi. The Jounin shrugged and happily flipped another page. "The weirdo's seal was causing problems with my chakra, so I couldn't use my bloodline or any decent ninjutsu. But my taijutsu has always been better than Kiba's and I knew I had him beat at speed." "What did the seal do?" Kakashi asked. He had an idea having reviewed the reports on Enko's seal the night before, but he wanted Sasuke's perspective on it. "It sucks your chakra and then pumps it out again. Only what comes out is far more potent. It also makes me want to hurt someone." Well, it made him want to rend someone limb from limb to tell the truth, but Sasuke was sure that Kakashi did not need that information. Kakashi nodded thoughtfully. With Enko, the thoughts were always murderous. Not that it took a lot to drive the half-crazy woman into a killing frenzy on the field. Perhaps Orochimaru had succeeded in taming the madness inherent in his technique? Whatever the case, the Jounin had already made his decision regarding the seal and he would see it through. Sasuke waited patiently for several seconds, hoping that his sensei and eternal fount of wisdom would have some sane advice to share, but if Kakashi had any, he was content to keep his thoughts to himself. "Well, anyways," the raven-haired genin continued, hiding his disappointment, "I knocked out the dog at the onset of the fight. Kiba got in a good hit when I went after his partner, but I considered it a fair bargain. Once Mutboy's dog was out of the equation, I was able to subdue him without much trouble." "What could you have done better?" Kakashi asked. "I could have used Bunshins to confuse Kiba when I went after Akamaru." Kakashi flipped a page and shot his ever-annoying grin at his student. "May not have worked," he observed musingly. "Inuzukas have a highly developed sense of smell. You'd have had to bunch your bunshins very close to each other and to yourself, minimizing the technique's effectiveness, and the false sense of security you'd get out of it would have potentially left you vulnerable. So, depending on how developed young Kiba's olfactory senses are, it may not have worked." Sasuke nodded. "Maybe, but I needed only a few seconds to take down Akamaru. And there are Inuzukas out there who can smell space-time jutsu," Kakashi replied, throwing a new fact in his student's face. For someone with very little data, Sasuke made a lot of assumptions about the world around him. Assumptions that for all the kid's skill at his job would see him dead someday. So, as the boys' teacher and leader, the Jounin considered it his latest sacred duty to stomp that useless arrogance into the ground and crush it until only self remained. The fact that he got a few chuckles out of it was a welcome bonus, moreover. Really? Sakura asked out of curiosity. Yes, it's common knowledge, actually. Not even restricted since the Yondaime's time after he created his signature technique, the Hatake replied without breaking eye contact with Sasuke. Sakura may have inadvertently ruined with her inquisitiveness, a lesson her raven-haired teammate needed to learn, but that was how the world worked. Best laid plans of mice and men go awry, after all. Sasuke looked away to the trees on the far side of the clearing. But Kakashi smiled a slight smile under his mask nevertheless. The boy's surrender told him a great many things indeed. So, what would you have done, sensei? Naruto asked. The Jounin turned his attention to his two remaining students then. I would have faked an attack on the dog to draw in the young Inuzuka and taken him from the flank with a shunshin. I'm not saying that what Sasuke did was wrong here, mind, it worked, after all, but you guys tend to think in straight lines. That'll only get you killed. Think outside the box. Learn to approach the problem from an oblique angle. To the Uchiha, he said, Sasuke, always remember that if Kiba had struck with a kunai, you'd have lost. Never forget that. Sasuke nodded. He had realized that little oversight right after Kiba struck him. What else did you learn? That all three of us are too accustomed to fighting as a team, Sasuke replied without hesitation. True, Kakashi agreed. It was intentional. Build the team as you build the individual. The three of you have grown a lot, but you've grown most as a team. As you saw in the forest and on the wave mission, Team 7 is greater than the sum of its parts. The loss of synergy you have built with your teammates when you fight alone is going to be jarring until your individual skills catch up. The solution to this problem is to learn quickly until your individual skills are up to par, of course. Of course. Kakashi did a weird little twirl of his fingers to signal that Sasuke's brief was over and turned to Sakura. Sakura, your fight. Sakura sat up straighter. I ensnared Yoroi, my opponent, in a genjutsu as soon as I entered the ground and even before the signal was given to start the fight, she said proudly. Kakashi nodded, and Sasuke and Naruto grinned at their teammate's sneakiness. That was their Sakura, all right. She could never fight on an even footing with either of them, and so she did not bother. She used every trick in the book and beyond to even the playing field, and on a good day, made them eat humble pie with a panache that hinted at the genius that had lain hidden within for so long. I did not know if he was any good at straight-up taijutsu, but his build and carriage suggested that he was a close-range fighter. You mean his ass, Pinky, Sasuke guffawed. Sure, he hadn't seen Sakura check out the bastard's ass, but it felt good to egg her so. Go blow a bull and fuck a duck, Yuke, Sakura shot back instantly. As Naruto collapsed to her left, clutching his stomach and beating the ground in belly laughter, she continued without batting an eyelid, I approached Yoroi from his left flank with two bunshins, while holding his attention on the other flank with the illusion. I was prepared to kawarimi away if it turned out that he'd seen through my genjutsu and was using himself as bait to entrap me. It turned out he wasn't, and I put two kunai in him. One into the back of his leg and the other through his palm. Any lessons learnt? He didn't put up a fight at all, Sakura replied with a shrug. What could one learn from a fight with a living dummy other than the different feel of real flesh resisting against metal compared to the fake stuff on a lifelike training model? She suspected a fight with Akamaru would have taught her more. Kakashi nodded. It was true that Yoroi was a pushover in the match. But then, if the file he'd read on the suspected traitor was true, the boy's specialty lay elsewhere. He has a bloodline that's particularly suited for close combat. You're lucky he was a one-trick pony who depended solely on his grappling skills, the jounin said. He wanted to say more but couldn't give voice to his suspicions lest his students ask uncomfortable questions that he wasn't prepared to answer. Team 7 nodded. What would you have done if he had seen through your genjutsu, Sakura? Kakashi asked, mainly so that he could teach his students a new lesson. And with this little kunoichi, there was always the chance that he could gain a completely new perspective on something old as well. They had all learnt from her unique perspectives in the past. I'm not as fast as Sasuke or Naruto, Sakura stated, and I don't have their strength. But as you'd pointed out in the past, sensei, my taijutsu form is very good for a genin, and I make excellent use of kawarimi and bunshin. Sakura's 3 listeners nodded. Sasuke and Naruto had learned to use the 2 low-level techniques to devastating effect from their pink-haired teammate. Kakashi himself acknowledged that he'd picked up a few pointers on the use of the 2 most basic of techniques in the shinobi's repertoire after seeing his cute kunoichi student in action. If Sakura'd been cognizant of the regard that her teacher and teammates had for her as a shinobi, she would have blushed crimson. With my physique, Sakura continued, I can't exchange blows with my opponents and in a test of strength, pummel them to the ground. It'd be best to finish my fights in one blow, whenever possible. True, Kakashi agreed, transferring his Ika to his right hand so that he could use his left to tend to the itch on his right elbow. By this time, Naruto was getting bored out of his wits. Why couldn't Sakura say what she wanted to say outright and be done with it? As she grew more confident, the girl let out more of her scholarly self during these discussions and it was mighty boring to hear her prattle on and on. Enough with the analysis. Tell us what you were going to do already, he whined, earning an elbow to his ribs from Sakura, and a glare from Kakashi and Sasuke. Ignore the clown. Please continue, Sakura, the jounin said. Naruto looked to Sasuke for support but the latter had already made his thoughts clear with the glare. With a sigh, the Uzumaki grumbled and resigned himself to enduring more boring talk. So, I've been working on my stamina as well as my chakra reserves, and been training to use chakra scalpels in a fight in my free time. So that I could deal out massive damage with touch alone. And you'd have used it in the fight? Sasuke asked. I was really hoping I wouldn't have to, the Haruno confessed. I would have hated to lose the element of surprise in the finals but if the situation were desperate enough, I would have. What good is a secret weapon for the finals if I don't make it that far? True, Kakashi agreed. Is that why you've been focusing on redirecting our attacks these last few weeks during our daily spars? Naruto pointed at Sasuke with his chin. Yes. I got the idea from the wave mission. You know that rogue hunter nin that used Sanban in a fight? I don't know how to use them but I know how to form scalpels. So, how does it work? Every time I grabbed your wrists or slapped you anywhere, I was targeting some muscle group or organ inside your body. If I'd used my scalpels, either of you would have been dead multiple times over. Sasuke grunted. In other words, taijutsu with you is a losing proposition. Surprise is key, Kakashi observed thoughtfully, your innovation is primarily an ambush weapon, but with your expertise in genjutsu, you're an ambush fighter already. Team 7 looked at their teacher expectantly, in the hope that he would elaborate more but Kakashi had other thoughts. Good work, Sakura. Naruto, share with us your thoughts on your fight. Naruto shot a wide grin at his pink-haired teammate. Two can play at this game of pedantry. And he'd bore her as much as she bored him. My opponent, Temari of Suna, was a wind user. Her fans were a clear giveaway. Sasuke groaned. Naruto was trying to sound like a scholar again. And as usual, he was failing miserably at it. Even before I entered the ring, it was clear that she was a long-range fighter specializing in area effect weapons. Sakura threw up her arms and shook her head. Kakashi smiled behind his mask at the antics of his students. Hopefully, someday in the future, Naruto would get the hang of making speeches that didn't make him look like a nincompoop. Her clumsy weapon is a big disadvantage at close combat. But you don't use something like her war fan unless you're really good at it. Well, maybe not. The way the boy was going anon stating the obvious, it was clear he'd kill his own brain dead long before he learned wisdom. My best hope, I thought, was to decoy her into using her weapon until she started tiring out and close with her. As a ruse, I charged her position to learn her capabilities. Once I was reasonably certain, I used a shunshin to close with her as she was recovering from her swing and knocked her fan away. She wasn't much of a challenge after that. Her basic skills were all right, but without her primary weapon, she was out of depth. Succinctly put, Kakashi said, but only because he did not want to shame his student further than the boy had himself. Lessons learnt? Always have something to fall back on, Naruto said with a shrug. He'd never understood why Kakashi thought there were lessons to be learnt from victorious battles, but he'd started cooperating after the Jounin beat the crap out of him for the third time. What was there to digest anyway? He went in, kicked ass and took names, and that was all there was to it. Kakashi inwardly breathed a sigh of relief. The blonde genin's observation was a valid one, this time. The Hatake still had hopes that Naruto would learn to dissect even the fights he won and look for areas of improvement. It was a lesson that the boy had stubbornly refused to absorb so far. He was a willing enough student studying losses, but forgot all about the ones where he emerged the victor. It was a shortcoming that most people had, but truly effective soldiers and armies did not suffer from it. And if the Uzumaki wanted to be a Hokage ever, he needed to understand that victory is as good a teacher as defeat. Precisely, he said. Your opponent was without doubt skilled with her weapon, but it was her sole ace. And since the fan was very visible, it was an obvious giveaway. Out on the field, when your strengths or weaknesses are that apparent, you better have a secret weapon for the rainy day, or you aren't long for this world. You probably saved her life in the long run with the defeat you handed her, Naruto. But you encourage us to concentrate on one field even to the detriment of others, Sensei, Sakura pointed out. First, I never said ignore other fields. I'm training you three to become experts in at least 2 areas with average or better than average skills in all others. You can't become proficient overnight, of course, which is why I'm focusing on one skill set above all others. Kakashi paused so that his words would register. Second, you can branch out later on, in fact, all senior shinobi do, but for genin, being a one-trick pony is perfectly acceptable. You have your team for support. And your mentor is always there by your side, after all. And while it's always better to be master of many so that you won't get flat-footed like the Kazekage's daughter, especially on something as important as an rank mission, you aren't going to be running them anytime soon, skilled as you are. Right now, if your teamwork and your sensei aren't enough, it means someone way over your pay grade screwed up badly. And we all die, Sakura said with a thin smile. Probably. The wave mission could have gone either way if you guys were any less capable. But we had you. You fought Zabuza and killed him, Naruto exclaimed. Kakashi smiled but did not reply. The wave mission may have been about Tsunade to begin with, but even halfway through, the parameters had changed and assumed national security level significance. The strategic implications were only now becoming clear as the political situation in wave improved. But the Jounin was not going to tell his students they'd completed an rank mission. It might get to their heads if he did. Especially when said rank was classified as an rank to throw interested foreign parties off scent as to the magnitude of what had really transpired on the little island nation in that 1 month. So, training? Sasuke asked. Yes, that, Kakashi said, flashing them his trademark smile. He paused a few seconds so that he could scan the last few sentences off the page. Once he'd read the porn goodness, he flipped to the next page and addressed Team 7. Sakura, your greatest weakness is your chakra capacity. All 3 genin nodded. This was old news. Both Sasuke and Naruto had been helping Sakura with her chakra potential for months now. Granted, your reserves have improved considerably these last few months, but they're still small. You'll make a deadly fighter if they weren't so pitiful. We've been working on it, sensei, Sakura said a little defensively. Sure, this was an AAR and you were meant to lay things out in the open as they are, but she really was giving her best. Kakashi nodded. I know. The coming month. We'll focus on taijutsu, ninjutsu, genjutsu, medical jutsu and building your chakra capacity. The intent, and this is true for Sasuke and Naruto as well, is to make you more rounded fighters henceforth. You guys are advanced enough in your primary skill sets that I feel it's safe to diversify a little. Team 7 felt proud at the acknowledgement, but they remained silent. Taijutsu and ninjutsu, Kakashi continued, you'll learn from study sessions as well as spars with Sasuke and Naruto in your copious spare time. The genin grimaced. They knew from prior experience what that meant. For the next month, they would have effectively little social life outside the team. You'll also learn genjutsu and medical jutsu in your free time. Another grimace. Make that no social life. The two of us will work solely on improving your chakra capacity and sharpening your tactical acumen. Sakura nodded. Slacking off is unacceptable. If you have to work 20 hours every day to complete your workload for the day, then by God, you will work 20 hours and make do with however little sleep you get, Kakashi said, speaking broadly to his three little killers. Sakura knew the coming month was going to suck royally, but for the first time in a long while, she felt content. For her, Kakashi's statement of intent today was the icing on the cake that confirmed what had slowly become obvious through the course of Wave Mission. The Jounin respected his students. And if his acknowledgement and approval came with an increased workload, she would gladly endure the hardships thrown her way. She would do no less for the man who'd made her a shinobi. And she was sure, so would her teammates. Kakashi turned to Naruto. Naruto, your chakra potential is fearsome. Your control sucks to nigh heaven. Sasuke snickered, though he'd known the sobering truth for a while now. Naruto was strong in spite of his chakra troubles. If the Uzumaki could control it, he would become an absolute monster. Kakashi narrowed his eyes at the Uchiha, who realized he was on precarious ground, though he did not understand why, and shut up. It was not as if he meant any harm with that dig, after all. Even still, the Jounin continued once Sasuke shut up. There really was no reason for the look he'd shot the young Uchiha except perhaps that he'd felt like it. Let the boy think of it what he will. We will not focus much on your control. With the chakra you have, chakra control beyond what you have is not an immediate priority. And what you lack in this area, experience will teach you best. Naruto's face split into a grin. He hadn't been looking forward to the chakra control lessons himself. We will concentrate on your ninjutsu, fuinjutsu and taijutsu as well as your genjutsu evasion skills, the Jounin pronounced. Fuinjutsu and taijutsu are for you to learn in your spare time. Sasuke needs training in the use of his Sharingan's genjutsu capabilities and you're the designated test rat. Sakura will be testing her wares on you as well. Naruto groaned. He hated genjutsu like he did nothing else. He knew he was weak in genjutsu applications, and he abhorred weakness like he did nothing else. His childhood experience had seen to that. Do not groan. We will work at it until you can at least defend yourself adequately against mine techniques. The Uzumaki nodded, if a bit sullenly. Cheer up. It's not all bad. I will teach you ninjutsu like you've always wanted. You won't need to beg and scrape at Sasuke to teach them anymore. You hear that, Sasuke? Naruto needled his teammate with a cheeky grin. I don't need you to teach me ninjutsu. Idiot. Yeah, well, fuck you, man whore. Impotent prick. Now, Sasuke, Naruto, pipe down, Kakashi intervened, smiling benignly. The two boys shut up by unspoken agreement. Several times now, since that first time on the wave mission, the Jounin had interfered in their fights. And in true Kakashi fashion, made them feel violated with only a few words. The last time had been particularly bad and made them feel dirty all over. Kakashi chuckled at his cowed students. They were getting better at masking their feelings, but they were simply out of their league. This was certainly the time to drop the first bomb of the evening. Naruto, we will also begin work on accessing the Kyuubi's chakra. It is a potent tool and I feel it's high time you learned to use it. Naruto looked slightly taken aback at Kakashi's announcement, but did not object. The Jounin's training methods had worked so far, reaping great rewards for Team 7, and he was not going to question his commander's decision now. So, as a stoic would, he calmly went with the flow. A part of the Uzumaki was excited by the thought, even. True to Orochimaru's broad statement regarding Team 7's lust for power in the Forest of Death, the young Jinchuriki's yearning for control and drive to dominate were great enough on their own accord to influence his thoughts decisively on the subject. Coupled with the respect and trust the Jounin commanded in Naruto and Team 7, they overrode what little unease the boy felt at the prospect of harvesting his prisoner's chakra to augment his prowess as a ninja on the battlefield. Kakashi let the silence at the end of his pronouncement drag for a few seconds in case Naruto had any questions or objections. Seeing that his student did not have any, the Jounin frowned slightly. This was the first time he'd misread any of his students since he took them under his wing. It appeared that he had misjudged how far Naruto had grown and matured. Quite possibly because of all the stupid stunts the boy still pulled. He considered this incident as yet another sign that his charges were growing up, and like any parent, he wasn't sure how he felt about it. Dismissing that line of thought for later when he had the time, Kakashi turned his attention back to the present, to Naruto and his demon. He had his reasons, rational and not, for avoiding the decision to train the boy as a Jinchuriki like a plague for months now. However, after that eye-opener of a meeting with Sarutobi, the council, Danzo and Anbu, he had realized he did not have any choice in the matter. Now, events beyond his control had forced him into a corner, and with war waiting just around the corner, damned he would be if his students suffered the same fate as poor Obito and Rin. Still, try as he might, the Hatake could not shake the shame at the thought of having failed his student in this regard, however inadvertently. No questions? Whatever it takes to win, Naruto replied, laconically. It wasn't the complete truth, but it would do. Yes, Kakashi nodded agreeably. He sensed there was more behind the decision than Naruto's stated reason, but it appeared that the youngster did not want to talk about it. We will discuss this later. Naruto shrugged, misinterpreting Kakashi's words to mean he doubted the genin wasn't 100% sure. But the blonde trusted his teacher to make this assessment, and since Kakashi was sure, so was Naruto. Perhaps most important of all, he felt neither hesitation nor doubt about the decision made. He was perfectly willing to stick to the plan so long as it did not derail. If it did, he would abandon the pursuit of Kyuubi's power until he was better equipped to handle it. Kakashi eyed the blonde thoughtfully and could not help the smallest of smiles once he divined the chain of thought that culminated in that shrug. It felt good to know that he had gained the complete trust of one of his students, and to know that his student was so confident. The Jounin was all for confidence earned with accomplishments paid for with sweat and blood. Sasuke, Kakashi said, turning to address the Uchiha, your Sharingan is powerful. But you are far from being its master. Naruto threw Sasuke a raspberry, who masterfully ignored the childish act. Kakashi, however, felt no compunction to act so restrained and snickered. You will train your speed, genjutsu and ninjutsu. Learn speed from your spars with Naruto and Sakura in your free time. Work with Sakura and Naruto on genjutsu every minute you get. I charge you and Sakura with responsibility for teaching Naruto defense against genjutsu. I cannot stress the importance of this enough. Without it, Naruto is a dead man walking. Sooner or later, he will meet a genjutsu expert and he will die. So bear that thought in mind. Kakashi paused and grinned inanely at his students. I give the two of you carte blanche to do whatever it takes to teach Naruto what he needs to survive. Sakura became severity incarnate at those words. Sasuke grinned like a maniac at the thought of all the things he could do to the annoying blonde. Naturally, Kakashi had to have some fun at the raven-haired genin's expense. Sasuke, master yourself. I understand you're an uke, and as your teacher, I accept you as the person you are, but really, I draw the line at creepy, gay daydreams in an AAR. Sasuke's mouth flapped open. He tried to speak but words failed him. Naruto and Sakura roared in laughter, clutching their torsos. Kakashi winked at them. I will teach you a few ninjutsu, but henceforth, I expect you to copy it from your opponents in the finals and from your teammates. You and I will work almost exclusively on mastering and utilizing your curse seal in battle. The Hatake paused as he had with Naruto before, but Sasuke was still out of it. The Jounin nodded at Sakura, who punched the Uchiha in his shoulder. What? Sasuke asked Sakura in an annoyed voice. Sakura pointed at Kakashi. Joined the world of the living, have we? Sasuke glared. Want me to repeat my words? I heard it, sensei. You said that you're going to train me in the use of the curse seal. Yes. Orochimaru offered you power. I'm offering you the same as well. You will get loads of it. Here. As a member of Team 7. Sasuke grunted in annoyance. I wasn't planning on joining the freak, he said pointedly. Kakashi's eyes narrowed. Orochimaru is not a joke, Sasuke. He is a genius of the highest caliber. Not realizing the seriousness with which the Jounin was treating the subject, Sasuke snorted dismissively. And I'm an Uchiha, he commented. Kakashi chuckled, as did Sakura and Naruto. Then quick as a flash, the Jounin was behind raven-haired genin, yanking his student's hair hard and painfully twisting his right arm behind him. Sasuke had sensed the movement but sitting on the ground, he was in no position to evade or defend himself against his teacher. The Jounin knew the boy was helpless the way he was seated, of course, which is why he did what he did. I don't doubt your loyalty, Sasuke. But I will not tolerate stupidity. Kakashi twisted the arm harder. I'm no Uchiha and I kick your ass every day. As does Naruto more often than not, for that matter. And when Sakura gets going, she makes the two of you look like rank amateurs. Kakashi released the hold and stood up. Get your head out of your ass, boy, he growled. That arrogance will get you killed one day. Sasuke said nothing. Neither did Sakura nor Naruto. Kakashi's action was completely unexpected, he hadn't gone psycho on them since the start of the wave mission and they'd gotten used to the mostly normal, pervert, and his reversion was all the more shocking for it. The Jounin cleared his throat to gain Team 7's attention. Anyways, he said, sliding back to laid-back self, I wanted to talk about something else. Naruto, Sakura, Team 10 witnessed your fight with the Sound Team while Sasuke was out. Sakura blinked and Naruto glared defiantly. Oh? What of it? The blonde asked. They didn't see the whole fight. But they saw enough of it to frighten them. I must say I'm intrigued. The bastards said they wanted to kill Sasuke, Naruto growled as if that simple statement was explanation enough. Kakashi knew why the Sound Team were after Sasuke and he even had an inkling why Orochimaru sent them. But national security was involved and he had to play dumb. Did they say why they wanted to kill Sasuke? Naruto glared at the ground. He was too angry to reply straight and so, Sakura stepped in. They said Orochimaru sent them. Ah. They just walked into the clearing, she continued, her eyes losing focus as she remembered her first kill. They had the gall to threaten us. They said if we don't give up Sasuke, they'd kill us. We refused and asked them, why? Naruto added. Sakura nodded and took over the narration. They said Orochimaru sent them to kill him. I don't remember much of what happened next. I think that I lost control. All that pent-up anger from when the traitor knocked Sasuke out and gave him that seal, Naruto explained to Kakashi when the latter shot him a question glance. Sakura shrugged. Next thing I know, I was splattered with blood and my kunai was sticking out of the sound girl's eyes. She used genjutsu and laid into them like she laid into you that day, Naruto elaborated, referring to the final test where Kakashi had beaten them all senseless. They fell like puppets. And what did you do? The last bastard tried to blindside Sakura, but I kicked him away. He hit a tree and took off into the forest, the coward. And you chased after him? Not immediately. Sakura was done with the other two by then and was standing around dumbly. I shook her out of it and told her to guard Sasuke. Then I went after the son of a bitch. And beat him to death with the handle of your kunai. I puked my guts out, afterwards, Naruto said defensively. But yeah, I did it. No one threatens my teammates while I'm alive and lives to tell the tale. I bet. The boy's face was caved in. Naruto's defiant glare intensified. Well, good work, Kakashi said after allowing the silence to stretch for a few seconds. Even Sasuke looked taken aback at the words of encouragement. That's it? No advice against committing needless murders? Naruto asked disbelieving. Don't be stupid, the Jounin replied. Our profession does not allow such sentiments. I would have objected if Sound were our allies or your actions had endangered the mission in any way. You weren't on a mission and Sound isn't an ally. But most of all, I won't say anything because I'm proud of you all. It's nice to see you've internalized loyalty to one's own and made it an important part of your work ethic. Kakashi peered down at his students. What do I care if a genin team from some village died like pigs in a slaughterhouse? They aren't mine in any sense of the word. I care that you don't regret it. Do you? Naruto and Sakura shook their heads. No nightmares? No. Then this meeting is over. We'll meet after lunch. You have the morning to yourselves, Kakashi said before sunshining away. Naruto got up and threw the pebble in his hands at a nearby tree. Naruto? Sakura? Yeah, Yuke. Thanks guys. I appreciate it. Sakura was too busy digesting Kakashi's words and was not much use at this point. Ah, shut up, Yuke. It's not like you wouldn't have done the same yourself. Sasuke turned his head to stare into the horizon, a genuine smile flitting across his face. He really had found a new family in his team. Breakfast? He asked. Ramen by God or I'll gut you alive. Yep, he had a family all right. At first sight, Suna appeared to have fallen on hard times and was struggling for survival. This was no surprise, considering the ever-tightening noose the ruling daimyo had around the village's economic mainstay. The nondescript trader hawking his wares from a bull-drawn cart knew otherwise. He was an agent of Konoha, and while it was true that the situation in Suna had taken a turn for the worse, the daimyo wasn't the cause of the latest turn in fortunes. To divine the cause, he'd made polite inquiries with the ostensible reason of purchasing goods to sell them at his next stop. He learnt that none of the essential materials of war, leather, steel, etc., were in stock. Going by whispered conversations between frightened civilians at shops and bars, they had all dried up mysteriously within the last few months. Calls had gone out for ninja reserves, and farmers and trade folk sensed that trouble lurked around the corner. Either fact, by itself was ominous, but together, they meant that Suna was rapidly gearing up for war. As far as the spy was concerned, however, the clinching argument for the war theory had to do with donkeys. Several months back, the donkey market had been shut down by express order of the Kage and the asses requisitioned by the Suna Supply Corps. This was a fairly common event under the paranoid Kage's rule that two of the merchants had dared to break the law. They had been drawn and quartered in the village square by Anbu as an object lesson. Since then, a few civilians had seen the donkeys laden with goods and being led south towards the ocean under escort since then. "Ah, Tanaka-san," the spy greeted, being a fat woman in a traditional kimono. Both the kimono and its owner had seen better days, though it was hard to believe in the case of the lady. "Toshihira-san," the lady Tanaka bowed. "Do you have incense with you?" Toshihiro Muraki, the spy, nodded. He did, indeed. Tanaka Yui was a pathological gossip and he had carefully cultivated her both as an information source and as a customer. She thought he was her friend as she was his. "I have some saved up just for my favorite customer," he said. "Masaru-san 2 streets down wanted it, but I told him I'd run out of the stuff." More than anything in the world, Yui liked to be granted preferential treatment and the spy always made sure she felt thus. "You're such a dear." "Anything for my loyal customer," Muraki replied, rummaging through the trunk for the incense. He pulled it out and handed it over to her. "There you go." Yui smiled at him. "Thanks," she said. "How's business?" He smiled his well-practiced and patently false, stoic smile. "So-so, but I'm making do." "I'm sorry to hear that. I thought that I could make a few sales in Suna before I head out north, but the village is half empty," he groused. "It's like the menfolk just up and decided to leave." The Tanaka pinched her lips as she waged a losing battle against her nature. Finally, she looked around guiltily and walked to the cart, making as if she were examining the wares on display. "It's because they have," she half-whispered, shooting a friendly smile at another matron hurrying down the street. "Indeed," the merchant exclaimed in a restrained manner. Playing the proper merchant, he moved closer to her and joined in her act. The two of them had done this countless times before. The lady flicked a fleck of imaginary dust off her kimono and nodded. "But who will protect the womenfolk?" "There are ninja around," she whispered vaguely. Clearly, the woman's mind was preoccupied with something else. But good as all this chit-chat was, Muraki wanted final confirmation of a piece of intelligence. Intel that was of vital importance to Konoha. "Even the Kazekage's children?" he asked, quietly. "No, the monster and his siblings are gone. Hopefully, they'll die." Yui Tanaka was quick to hate and spiteful as her kind usually are, which was why the spy asked the question. Now, he could direct the conversation where he wanted without appearing suspicious. "The youngest one is creepy," the spy said, "but surely, he is not a monster." "He's a killer," Yui spat vehemently. "That little boy? I've seen him around a few times. He was a strange one, but he didn't look so threatening." "He has the one tail sealed within him," Yui whispered in a voice that was barely this side of audible. "He's a monster." And Muraki had his confirmation. He would make the drop at the usual point 7 miles north of Suna at night. Within the week, the Hokage would have the precious intel in his hands, but the spy did not care about all that. The decisions made with the fruits of his labor were not his concern. Only getting them to his control was. Sarutobi glared at the daimyo's messenger standing rigidly before him. Mizuki observed the conversation with feigned disinterest from his desk at the entrance of the Hokage's office. "The daimyo's request is impossible to honor," the Hokage said forcefully, faking anger himself. "I have an exam to conduct within village walls and foreign shinobi to monitor." "Be that as it may, Lord Hokage," the daimyo of Hai no Kuni wishes shinobi from his loyal ninja corps to execute his wishes within the time frame specified. The messenger repeated his earlier words, laying added emphasis on loyal. Put that way, with that implied threat, Sarutobi could not rightfully refuse his liege the tasking request before him. The Hokage made a show of thinking long and hard, which Mizuki believed. The Chunin, skilled though he was in the ninja arts, had neither the talent nor the experience to differentiate truth from falsehood in the third's words and actions. So, he took the bait, hook, line and sinker. "I'll have to activate the reserves and send out my ANBU," the veteran shinobi general muttered aloud. It never occurred to Mizuki that the third had modulated his voice so that it could carry over to his desk. The Chunin was too preoccupied about the financial windfall about to come his way to really pay attention to the rest of the conversation, but the messenger and the Hokage did not take any chances. They played their parts to perfection with such flair that even a skeptic would have been hard-pressed to disbelieve the apparent truth in the argument. When Mizuki made the drop that night, no one tailed him. The location hadn't been a secret for months. ANBU had long since rented a house 2 down from the garbage bin and put it under constant surveillance. And when Kabuto made the pickup that night, his first time ever, he did not know it, but he was observed by 2 experienced ANBU working the stakeout. Kakashi stood at attention before the Hokage as the latter gently eased himself into the couch in his living room. "Kakashi, my apologies for calling you in at so late an hour," the oldster said. "I live to serve, Hokage-sama," the Jounin replied, more severely than he meant to. The third smiled and waved at a chair. "Sit." Kakashi took the proffered seat and glanced questioningly at his commander and general. "I asked you here because I'm concerned." The Jounin raised an eyebrow. "Please, Kakashi, allow me to explain. I learned from my ANBU reports today that you are training Sasuke in the use of his cursed seal. I understand your reasons, but I'm concerned. Hokage-sama, if you're concerned the cursed seal is evil. Please, Kakashi. I'm not one of those fools blinded by fear. Power by itself is never evil. Neither is its application. It's always the user who is. With respect, Hokage-sama, there is no reason to doubt Sasuke's loyalty," the Jounin said offhandedly. Sarutobi, however, sensed the anger hidden behind the Hataki's words. No teacher liked to have his student called a traitor to his face, after all. The first order of business then, was to placate the Jounin. "I have utmost faith in your ability as a teacher," the third said, "but I fear Orochimaru's hold on the boy." Kakashi nodded. "Unless Naruto and Sakura join him in exile, Sasuke will not betray the village, Hokage-sama. Naruto's loyalty to you is unquestioned. He will die before he breaks faith with you. Sakura's loyalty is divided between the village and the team, but she will put the needs of the village before that of the team. She will not leave because that would jeopardize Konoha. And Sasuke will not cross that Rubicon." Sarutobi thought it over for a while in silence. "And if you're wrong? I'll do my duty by the village, Hokage-sama," the Jounin spoke harshly. "My apologies, Kakashi. Best of luck with your team. Jiraiya-sama." The gray-haired Sannin turned askance at the ANBU who'd appeared at a non-threatening distance before him, wondering why the operative was making contact now. He was less than an hour's walk from the village and the least the man could do was wait until he was refreshed and within the walls before announcing his presence. "Unless Sarutobi-sensei I send you?" The ANBU nodded. "Urgent message?" "I bring movement orders, Jiraiya-sama." "For me?" "Yes. I was told to convey this. You're to stay hidden outside the walls of Konoha till the night before the finals. On that night, you will report at the location described in this scroll." Jiraiya collected the scroll. He ensured that the seal was not tampered with and breaking it, read the contents. The Sannin made to pocket the parchment and leave once he was done, but the ANBU interrupted him. "My orders are to ensure the scroll is destroyed, Jiraiya-sama." The contents of the scroll certainly warranted such paranoia, containing as it did, not only the rendezvous but also the outline of the op plan for the Chunin exams along with other relevant and highly sensitive information. He would have preferred to study it further, but the ANBU was right. The information was just too important to carry around in a physical storage medium, especially after said medium was unsealed. His memory would have to do. "My bad," Jiraiya said with a wry, apologetic grin and handed over the scroll. The masked shinobi nodded gratefully. He'd been afraid that the Sannin would throw a fit over some stupid point of pride like a few of the older shinobi were wont to, but the veteran hadn't. The Anbu collected the scroll and burned it immediately. He crushed the ash under his feet and left without another word. The early morning rush at the market was at its peak as people bustled about, buying fresh produce for breakfast. Mizuki was one of the hundreds out bargaining with the merchants this morning. A Chunin's salary did not allow such luxuries as hiring genin to do your housework for you. Not if you wanted to save money, at least. And Mizuki, though he was rich beyond dreams and would soon have the power to match, had donned a role as a loyal Chunin of moderate means and had to play it to perfection. As the traitorous Chunin navigated a particularly crowded mass of people standing at a fishmonger's and blocking the road, he felt a little prick like an insect sting on the back of his left thigh. It was sharp, but in his exuberant state of mind, he did not pay much attention to it. Not that it would have helped him if he had anyways. The final symptom came as a sharp jolt from his thigh and rapidly turned something much worse. Mizuki fell to the ground, clawing, as his jaws locked and his body went into seizure. He was dead within the minute. His assassin, a kind old lady who'd once been Anbu during the Second Shinobi War, had long since left the scene of the assassination by then. The oldster used a cane to get around. But it was clear that he did not really need it, just as it was clear that he was a veteran shinobi and a survivor of many battles. The men manning the security post on the T-country border gave him their full cooperation after he produced the daimyo's and the Hokage's orders before their commandant. "Is that all, Master Koichi?" the young conscript asked. He was as much in awe of the investigator as he had been afraid that the man had come to investigate their little unit for corruption. They'd only done it because everyone else did, and the bribes were a nice supplement to their income. It wasn't as if they had let enemies of the state pass through or anything, after all. Just a few merchants without the proper papers now and then. The old man smiled. He sensed how agitated the garrison was, but that was no surprise. It was really impossible to stop smuggling across the border, and it would take the rare honest individual with the courage of conviction to refuse his comrades to stay off the take. He had discovered a few discrepancies in that regard while auditing the current post, but he wasn't interested. His job wasn't to put an end to trade across the border, after all. The daimyo and the Hokage recognized that it could not be stopped and only intervened when the scale of operations became too large. No, the veteran had found something much more interesting. He had 3 more posts to inspect, but the movement orders he'd gleaned from the merchant donkey trains was all the information he needed. Konoha now knew where the main body of the Tsunade force was headed and even had a rough timeframe of the schedule the invaders followed. "No, I've found nothing interesting," Master Koichi said. "I will lunch and be on my way, if it isn't too much of a bother." Tsunade glared at her Anbu escort, her companion and guard, Shizune, her pet pig, Taunton, and of course, the old geezer seated before her. "Old man, I demand an explanation," she growled at her teacher. "Explain what, Tsunade?" Sarutobi asked, making himself comfortable in his couch. It was late night and Tsunade had been kept sequestered in the Hokage's basement since she showed up at the gates of Konoha that morning. "Your Anbu accosted me a few miles from the village. I was to disguise myself in nondescript clothes," they said. "Shizune and I were to split up and report at specified times at your doorstep. I followed those inane instructions, but when I showed up, your housekeeper showed me the den and locked in. What is the meaning of this?" The meaning, newly reinstated Jounin and special advisor of the Hokage, Senju Tsunade, is this. Konoha is at war and has need for your services again. Tsunade spluttered. "How dare you," she seethed vitriol. "I lost everything I've ever loved to this village. Isn't that enough for you? Sarutobi stared passively at the blonde Sannin. Tsunade slumped, seeing that her anger wasn't having any effect. Aren't all the sacrifices I've made for this village enough? She asked, trying a different tack and pleading. I don't have any more to give, sensei. I'm useless. I can't even work as a medic. You will overcome your fear of blood in due time, he decreed imperiously. Then, softly, I'm not asking you to fight on the front lines, Tsunade. I'm not even asking you to operate on the wounded. The first is a no-no and the latter is up to you. But the village needs you. It needs your medical expertise and the hope your presence will bring to the hearts of our shinobi on the front lines. Tsunade bit her lip and thought about it. But there wasn't any choice here and she knew she could not refuse. There was the threat of debt and life as a nuke hanging over her head. What do you want of me? Take over the administration of the medic corps. Teach them. Share your wisdom. Save lives. The offer was much more kind than she had expected. Tsunade nodded. He groaned as he ground into her and she moaned softly into his ear, her legs clamping around his waist in a death grip as it strove mightily to pull him deeper inside. The bed creaked as they played the age-old game under the moonlit night, their union illuminated by the pale light of Earth's little lover streaking through the window. A soft breeze blew strands of her unbraided hair across her face and as he quickened his thrusts to match her urgency, he brushed them aside and kissed her full on her lips. She groaned into his mouth and his tongue found hers. The room filled with soft moans of her pleasure, the wet slurps of their kissing, the heated grunts of his passion and the smacking of two bodies moving against each other in the simplest and purest expression of love there is. Afterwards, as he laid on her, his head against her bosom, her fingers running through his hair, their sweat glistening on their bodies and him still inside her wet depths, she patted him on his shoulders and he looked up. I love you, she whispered. This time, when he replied, there was no hesitation like the 3 nights before. I love you, too. I wish we could spend more time together. Well, it's a hectic time at work right now. Will you ever be free? I want a few days all to ourselves without your job coming in between. He hesitated. He wasn't really supposed to talk about his work to anyone outside the armed forces. However, her request was a minor thing. Surely, it had no security implications. Most of the fleet will retire to the port for shelter, repair work and provisions at the cusp of winter 3 months from now, he said. Security will be routine and I'll have trained my newbie adjutant by then. I should be able to get a week or 2 off then. Could you? I'm sure I can. I'll talk to the base commander and get it approved. And yet another piece fell into place. Why the forlorn face, Kabuto? Orochimaru asked in his sneering voice. Kabuto was the most talented of the exiled Sannin's playthings and Orochimaru liked to egg him on so. Mostly because he loved mind games with someone who was his near intellectual equal. Mizuki's story checks out, Orochimaru-sama, the spectacled spy replied. And you feel bad because something doesn't feel right. Why would the daimyo want an ANBU detail of all times now? There are foreign shinobi around and Konoha is in a heightened security state especially with the assassination of Mizuki, yes, but the reserves give me a bad feeling. Ah, but there's a reason for the reserves, dear Kabuto, Orochimaru drawled. The spy adjusted his glasses. Indeed? Yes. The fire daimyo is preparing for war with T within the next few months. Orochimaru did not say that the information was reported by the deceased turncoat, Mizuki. It was a minor oversight but an inexplicable one since the Sannin's mind was preoccupied with the dead Chunin in the first place. But he was also focused on Kabuto and their game, and he aired. Have we shared this with T-Country? You shouldn't keep such vital intelligence out of my hands, Orochimaru-sama, Kabuto admonished. Not if you want me to make the best decisions coordinating our forces for the Chunin exams. Orochimaru grinned as a predator eyeing prey. You have the information now, Kabuto, he said, avoiding the infiltrator's question. Have you considered that our troops are using tea to smuggle themselves in Hai no Kuni? Will Fire's troop movements coincide with ours? It's almost autumn, Kabuto. Fire will not declare war until next summer. But they are preparing and we haven't informed our allies in tea, Kabuto mused aloud. Yes. We don't want to panic them and Fire's plans suit us just fine. Let them prepare for the future. We'll steal their present momentarily. Kabuto smiled broadly. I'm concerned, Kabuto, Orochimaru continued in a more serious tone, about Mizuki's death. Who ordered the assassination? Kabuto adjusted his glasses again. The Hokage's office is in bigger disarray than we are because of the killing. My sources tell me the third is livid. It's common knowledge that ANBU have been streaming in and out of the MP HQ all day long and the MPs themselves have been scurrying like mad, calling in lots of people for questioning. They even appear to be making some headway. So it checks out. All is as you would expect when someone who worked with sensitive information is assassinated like Mizuki was. We did not liquidate Mizuki and it appears, neither did Konoha. Who else had it in for him? The Sannin wondered aloud. It's quite possible he was selling secrets to other nations as well, Orochimaru-sama, Kabuto said, offering an alternate explanation. Orochimaru thought it over. Investigate along those lines. I want whoever killed Mizuki found and I want them liquidated in return. I don't like my pets being messed with, especially when the pet was an useful one. Kabuto nodded and marched off to execute his master's commands. Sarutobi glared at the reports on his desk and then at the blonde medic Nin before him. Tsunade, he spat his student's name in an acidic tone, his eyes narrowed. The Sannin flashed a cherubic smile at her teacher and commander in reply. I have before me, the Hokage continued, 3 formally filed complaints on your conduct. I have had Shinobi complaining all week about the cooperation they get from you in the pursuit of their lawful duty to Konoha. Tsunade's smile widened and the third firmly quelled the urge to strangle his student. He could do it only because both knew that the cards were stacked against the Sannin and there was no way she could win. They both knew, however, that even though her cause was a lost one, she could still make a big nuisance out of herself. Which she was. Rather well, in fact. In light of your extenuating circumstances, I could ignore all these complaints, but now, Sarutobi grit out, I hear that we're 2 days behind schedule on a project that's vital to Konoha's security. When I ask about my reports to explain the delay, they point their finger at you and make no secret of their contempt for my genius medic student. I'm willing to forgive a great many things of my students, Jounin, but not when the village and my people are at risk. What do you have to say for yourself? Tsunade did not reply, though the grin remained firmly etched on her face. For the first time, Sarutobi wondered if he could get through to her or even if he should. Perhaps she was really so petty as to put her interests ahead of the whole village's and turn a blind eye to the crisis almost upon them all. You asked me to make myself of use. I'm making myself of use, she replied after a few seconds of that smug silence. The Hokage shot out of his seat and slammed his hands on the desk, bristling with anger. No, Tsunade, you're not. What you're doing is making a nuisance of yourself and being criminally negligent. I would say traitorous, if I didn't know you better. Do not make me doubt the wisdom of my decision to bring you back, Jounin. You can do right by your duty to your people and live, or you can die a traitor. There's no middle ground and there's no other choice. So make your decision. Here. Now. Should I put you down like a rabid dog that's a danger to everyone around it, or will you make yourself of use? Tsunade's smile faded in the middle of her teacher's rant. She scowled, her face, a caricature of righteous fury. Oh, you give me the freedom to choose now, she growled. Freedom I didn't have when you ordered me to this hell hole and... The Hokage slammed his desk again, cutting off the Sannin mid-rant. What do choice and freedom have to do with duty? And how is what's on the table now different to what you had before? He asked in a low voice that sounded reasonable, but really wasn't. Truth was Sarutobi was nearing the end of a short fuse. Tsunade did not reply. She simply glared at a point over Sarutobi's right shoulder. You remember what duty is, don't you, apprentice? It's what made Dan and Nawaki fight against impossible odds and sacrifice their lives. It's what made him, the third pointed at the carved face of the fourth on the monument visible through the window, sacrifice his life, his family and his son, and condemn the last to a life of hate and fear as a Jinchuriki to protect the village. It's what gives honor to every hero who'd ever laid down their life in this village's defense. So choose your next words carefully, apprentice mine, lest they be the last few to ever come out of your mouth. I understand your pain and anger, but I will not have my mentor's granddaughter, of all people, dishonoring the many honorable souls who'd laid down their lives for the good of the village. Tsunade glared at her teacher anew, angered by his low blows. She grit her teeth and was the picture of anger and misery as tears glittered in her eyes. She had given too much already and had nothing left. Couldn't her master understand that? The Hokage walked around the desk and pushed the blonde into a chair even as he leaned against his desk. Sit, he ordered in a stern voice. Your loss was great, but you cannot live in the past forever, Tsunade. What would Dan or Nawaki? Tsunade made to stand as the third spoke those two names again, but the oldster pushed her back forcefully. The Sannin could have easily overpowered him. She was old, but he was a lot older than her and there was always her phenomenal strength to fall back on, but he was giving her that disapproving look he used to when he was their Jounin mentor and she could never stand up to it. Sit down and listen, I said. Your teacher and master speaks to you now. A pause. Good. I feel for you and I understand your pain, apprentice, but it's not right that you should ruin yourself over past regrets. Tsunade sniffled then as anger deflated and the old, festering wound opened anew. I have nothing, she whispered. They took everything away. I've given all that I had and I have nothing more to give. There's nothing more to take, sensei. Please let me go. Sarutobi raised her head and his eyes met hers. You have the village. You have the memories of the two men in your life. Honor their memories. Honor the village. Protect the ideal they gave their lives for. Defend their dream. Protect their people. The Sannin looked at her teacher in confusion. Go, Tsunade. Live their dream as you loved them. The Sannin did not quite acquiesce, but as she walked away, she glanced back and gave her teacher the strangest look. Sarutobi eyed the door for the longest time as he made the only decision that he could given the Sannin's behavior so far. Reduce her security clearance, he said aloud, sounding defeated. A side door opened at the Hokage's words. The ANBU intelligence head stepped out of a secret closet barely large enough to seat one man. You want her stripped of her Jounin status, Hokage-sama? The ever-paranoid commander asked. Sarutobi shook his head, even though he knew that in Tsunade's case, his subordinate's paranoia was perfectly justified. The Sannin could not be trusted. He'd hoped she'd become his successor, but it was now clear that whatever Tsunade had once been, she wasn't Hokage material anymore. No, but keep her under observation. Ensure that she's aware of the surveillance, but don't be so obvious that she'll have cause to complain. The commander nodded. The Sannin would expect the spies after that meeting and would think something amiss if there were none on her tail. Do not entrust her with anything relating to national security, the third added as an afterthought. He knew the instruction wasn't really needed, for the commander was as professional and capable as they come, but this was national security and only a fool left things to chance. As of now, Jounin Senju Tsunade is on probation for 6 months pending review. At the end of these 6 months, the masked ANBU trailed off. The Hokage caught the man's eye in silent acknowledgement of the man's concerns. Tsunade's main responsibility for the next 6 months is to document her medical knowledge on scrolls as well as to selected officers in the medic corps. If her loyalty is found wanting at the end of this period, we'll deal with her then. The finality with which the third said deal left no room for doubt that it was an execution warrant. A skilled shinobi like Tsunade who knew a lot of dirty secrets could not be allowed to leave the village if her loyalty was doubtful. More so when said shinobi harbored a grudge against her village, which the Sannin would by the end of the grace period if she did not change. The ANBU tracker knelt down by the remains of the campfire and examined the wet ash. He held up 2 fingers to his patiently waiting captain. 2 hours since the fire was doused. We made good time, Stinker, his commander asked in that calm, collected-sounding voice of his. Stinker, the tracker and a seasoned veteran of many battles, nodded. He liked the rookie officer because the captain had sounded just as calm and collected in the middle of a running battle with 3 high-ranking Nukenin. In Stinker's opinion, nothing instilled confidence in men as the knowledge of their commander's carefree conduct in the middle of a fight. Conversely, there was nothing worse than a panicking officer to destroy confidence and morale. But as professional as the squad leader was and as much as he admired the man, Stinker reminded himself, there was work to be done. He pushed the thoughts about his commanding officer aside and turned his attention to the task at hand. The expert examination of spoor left by the trail animals. Once he'd learned all he could from the donkey droppings, Stinker turned to face his captain. We're less than an hour and a half behind them, he pronounced and pointed to the forest bordering the hills a dozen miles to the left of the trail. They're headed for that forest. The captain turned to regard the hills and nodded absent-mindedly. That country was wild and mostly uninhabited. Ideal if you're a thief, bandit, smuggler, or in this case, wannabe invader. Even though his CO's attention was focused elsewhere for the most part, Stinker sensed the unasked question. The captain may be a recently promoted newbie, but he was very good leadership material. Good enough that he understood he had to give his tracker sufficient time to complete his report before interrupting him. In a trade route such as this one, Stinker elaborated, partly because the captain was the sort of guy who was interested in such things and partly because it struck his fancy to show off to this man he admired, there's always the possibility of confusing one merchant train with another. But there are various clues that point to this one as our trail. Our man's piss on that bush over there, the spoor from the worm-infected donkey and of course, the lame one that's hurt its right front leg. A brief pause as Stinker debated whether he should make a statement as a part of his verbal report that wasn't based on facts. That last one's probably the work of our man as well. The captain turned to regard his subordinate. He debated whether he should praise the man for a job well done for all of 2 seconds before he made up his mind. Nice work, Stinker, he said. Tell Spitter that we move in 5. Stinker nodded with a smile. The captain had never praised anyone in the unit before, not that the men had exactly been clamoring for his recognition the first 2 months of his assignment. The situation was now different, of course, after the man led them to an easy victory against the Nukenin. Thus, grinning broadly, Stinker walked to the XO, who was set up on the perimeter and to convey the order. The squad was equipped with radios, but using even short-range ones, which was what they were equipped with, while tracking prey was folly. The movement orders taken care of, the captain summoned a hawk to carry a message back to HQ, Soryu, please carry this message to ANBU intelligence. Mule Train 3 headed into Forest 2177. Forest 2177 was roughly a full day's travel from Konoha, half a day's march and another half to rest and recoup. It was inaccessible country to most and was considered useless from a military standpoint by powers friendly and otherwise outside fire country. It was also one of the best-kept military secrets in the land, though the reason it had remained hidden for so long was mostly because of luck than by design. Konoha had detailed maps of every square inch of Fire Country and most places beyond since the first reign of the third Hokage. The maps gave the armies of Fire and Konoha a marked advantage over the other states as they had never given much thought to cartography as a tool of war. Oh sure, they used maps, but none as detailed or as accurate as Leaf's. But Orochimaru, for all his mania and insanity, was an ex-student of Sarutobi. He grew up immersed in a military culture that understood far better than its opponents the important role detailed knowledge of the terrain in the AO. And at one time, when he was one of the most trusted of the Hokage's subordinates, he was privy to all but a handful of Konoha's secrets. Thus, he knew of the secret, naturally occurring watering hole hidden in Forest 2177 depths. Since Orochimaru's defection, ANBU HQ had always assumed that the qualitative lead Konoha enjoyed for several decades in the area of maps was lost even when its opponents and competitors made the same stupid use of terrain outside their own lands as they always had. The question, for the office of Hokage, had always been when and not if Orochimaru would use his knowledge against his former homeland. That time, it had been clear since the unraveling of the Oto Tsunade conspiracy, was now. With dozens of similar hard-to-access but secure hidey-holes peppered across Fire Country, many of which were created for that express purpose by Konoha itself, the question once the Snake Sannon's conspiracy was unraveled had always been which of the many likely spots the invaders would use for the raid. HQ had narrowed the list down to less than a dozen of the biggest ones from intelligence gathered about the supply trains, but with everything else going on at ANBU right now, staking all those spots was beyond their capacity. There was also the fact that there would be advance parties of the opposition's ANBU guarding the approaches of the locations themselves, and nobody wanted to risk a Leaf Shinobi falling into enemy hands while scouting the terrain. But now, Soryu would carry the confirmed identity of one of the staging points. The largest of them all for the watering hole at Forest 2177 was the biggest one, and the rookie captain had no doubt in his mind that the main detachment of the enemy's forces headed for the spot was going to be buggered. Sarutobi closed the report with his withered hands and looked up at Ibiki. He did not look pleased. "I would have you explain this failure to me in simple terms." Ibiki grimaced inwardly. The Hokage was angry. This was not going to be pleasant session. But then, after reading that report, what commander wouldn't be? "We know who carried out the assassination, Hokage-sama," he said, summarizing the report. "The hit on Chunin Mizuki was carried out by one of the contemptibles, but we've been unable to trace the order beyond that point." "And that is precisely the point that I'm trying to understand," the Hokage retorted. "Each of the black cells has one control, Ibiki. It's pretty simple to follow up that control's chain of command until you find the guilty party. But there's almost no direct contact between the control and the cell, Hokage-sama," the Jounin replied. "There are only drop points, and somehow, someone knew this cell's designated drop point. We didn't realize it earlier, and by the time we did, the trail was cold. However, we were able to confirm the hit was ordered by someone outside the chain of authority." The Hokage slumped. Given the nature of the unit that was compromised, it was easily the blackest of the black wetwork units in Konoha. The breach of security that particular revelation signified was easily the stuff of nightmares. Someone, somewhere had hoodwinked everyone and breached the veil of secrecy on some of the most clandestine units in the Konoha Ninja Corps. That is grave news. The order was destroyed as per protocol by the assassin, but we confirmed that it had all the proper authentication codes as well as the seal of your office. It was written on your letterhead. We investigated the possibility that a sheaf was stolen during manufacturing, but the records check out. One of your letterheads had one page missing, however. That is perhaps the only good news out of this whole affair." Sarutobi nodded in relief. While it was still possible that some foreign agency had penetrated Konoha security so thoroughly, paranoia was the name of the game in the world of intelligence. After all, it was far-fetched enough that they could discard it. But it weren't an outside outfit acting the fool, it's some faction within Leaf must have done the deed. Not that it made much sense for anyone within Leaf to use the contemptibles to assassinate someone like Mizuki, but no self-respecting agency would steal a single leaf of paper from the Hokage's letterhead, fake his seal and then compromise the biggest intelligent coup of the century to eliminate an useless pissant like the dead Chunin. Even still, having covert operations penetrated by some splinter group inside the village working at odds with the office of Hokage was unbearable. It'd appear we have lots of rats in the closet, Ibiki. Yes, Hokage-sama. We suspect Root, but without solid proof. I suppose that this more than anything else that's happened in the last few months, highlights the necessity for a complete overhaul of our security setup as well as rigorous unit-wise audits to ensure compliance. Institute security reviews, Ibiki. Rework procedures and update authentication processes. Delegate as needed within your unit. I want this done ASAP. Yes, Hokage-sama. And order that compromised assassin back from her post. We'll get her a desk job, or make her an advisor or something else on the field. Ibiki nodded and rose from his seat, the meeting apparently at an end. Sarutobi took a drag from his pipe and thought about ordering his existing letterheads destroyed and a new one made, but thought better of it. Ibiki, are we sure that only one leaf was stolen? Yes, Hokage-sama. Thank you. That'll be all. Danzo looked on passively as two of his subordinates drag the body of the incompetent bastard who'd thrown a wrench into so many half-ripe plans away. His men were supposed to be emotionless but effective soldiers, and not brainless with no capacity for independent thought like this particular despicable specimen of Root. Or maybe the man was guilty of too much independent thought and that was his crime? Danzo did not really care. He expected his soldiers to expand on his orders and carry them out in the most effective manner possible. He certainly did not expend a considerable part of Konoha's covert budget training them so that they could interpret a casual comment that couldn't, in any way, be misconstrued as a lawful order as one. Even worse was the fact that the imbecile had acted on it independently and with no regard for the ramifications his actions would have on the big picture. In the end, he had compromised Root's greatest intelligence coup within Konoha to date. And all for the sake of a known traitor whose execution was already ordered by Sarutobi and scheduled on the day of the Chunin finals. Now, because of one stupid, son of a syphilitic whore, Sarutobi would know that his own little black corps of assassins tucked away all over the elemental lands was compromised. The knowledge was sure to alert him to Danzo's maneuvering. There was no one else within Konoha with the wherewithal to pull off something like this, and make the wily, old codger wary henceforth. As a direct effect, it was also going to be infinitely harder to bring him down when the time came. Whatever one said about the Third's pacifist nonsense, the man was deadly on any field of battle, be it political or on the field. Hey, Kakashi, how are your students coming along? Asuma asked, citing the fellow jounin as he stepped into the tea house. Kakashi smiled cheekily from behind his mask. He'd been waiting all day for someone to ask that question and he had the wittiest comeback. You'll find out yourself at the finals. Asuma chuckled, but then the jounin laughed at pretty much anything. So maybe it wasn't all that funny a reply, after all. You're working them that hard, huh? That was information Kakashi wasn't going to share. Not even with the Hokage, much less with his colleagues. No comments, Asuma. I don't ask you about your Nara and you don't ask about my cherubs. The younger Sarutobi snorted at the mental image of Team 7 dressed as innocent babes. Ino still flinched whenever idle talk drifted to Kakashi and his team. Oh, ease up, Kakashi. I'm not trying to undermine yours. Kakashi nodded. I know, but it's better this way. There'd always be the temptation to share once you know. Asuma granted the Hataki that point. It was true, after all. How's Sasuke? He asked. Kakashi frowned. Not safe, he answered, looking very concerned. Orochimaru marked him and I'm afraid the snake'd come back for him during the finals. Asuma sat up a little straighter. You think so? I know so. That bastard could never keep his hands out of the cookie jar. Asuma shoved down the urge to grimace. True. You know, I'd wondered along the same lines, but the Hokage's been silent on the topic and I thought. Kakashi nodded, acknowledging the silent message. Yeah. But they're my students, you know. I worry. Well, here's hoping the bastard doesn't show up, Asuma toasted. Later that night, as Asuma left the bar, Kakashi followed the other Jounins departing form in satisfaction. The Hokage's son wasn't a gossip, so he would keep their conversation to himself, unlike one of the Jounin who'd been sitting close enough to overhear the Hataki. Which was another reason why Kakashi chose Asuma earlier in the evening. Now, their silent interloper would go around spreading the gist of the talk he'd overheard. No one would admit to believing him, but they'd listen to him nonetheless because that's what Shinobi did. Hopefully, more than a few would consider the topic carefully and make the right decision. It wasn't the best solution, but it wouldn't get him before a Shinobi jury for revealing national secrets, and it would give ninja with brains a fighting chance. And that was enough for Kakashi. There you go, Tsunade said, placing a metallic cylinder on the desk. It's done. The director of Medic Corps looked at the container in amazement. After the delays to the project that Tsunade herself had caused earlier in the month, he hadn't really expected to meet the tight deadline and had conveyed the same to his superiors. But he hadn't accounted for the meeting the Sannin had with the Hokage. Whatever the old man said or did, it must have done a world of good because the Senju went from pain in the ass, loser to self-motivated, go-getter overnight. She worked on the project as if she were possessed and had somehow managed the impossible by completing it early. Now he understood why the Ultimers called the legendary three miracle workers, because that's what they regularly did. Thanks, Tsunade-sama, he said. I still can't figure out why you would want such a large batch of the cocktail, she replied with a grimace, but I'm not being paid to make guesses here. You tell me what else you need and I'll do it. The director nodded. That was just as well. His instructions were clear. Tsunade was to be shielded from classified information of any sort. She could work on sensitive projects, but only so long the data she'd have in her hands was incomplete and inadequate to draw any conclusion, which in this case, it was. On that vein, is there anything else that you need? The Sannin asked. Not at the moment, Tsunade-sama, though I was hoping you'd do me a favor. Oh? The director smiled. Yes. It'd be great if you'd write the textbooks for some of the advanced medical subjects as consulting material for incoming shinobi. I can do that. And if it isn't a bother, I was wondering if you'd document your esoteric techniques. Practical observations and such as well. The information would be highly confidential and wouldn't be available to just anyone, of course. But it's knowledge, and as a fellow scholar, I'm sure you understand the need to preserve it for posterity's sake. Of course, Tsunade agreed, but her thoughts were elsewhere. The director was good for a civilian at dissembling information, but he had not the skill to hide subtle clues from a seasoned shinobi. His flitting eyes told her the man was lying. But she was on thin ground, she knew, and she had to cooperate. Not because she feared for her life, though that was also part of the reason, but she wanted to see if it was possible to live the life her brother and her fiancé lived and died. If she could not, then be damned to Sarutobi and his village. She was one of the legendary three, and she would damn well get out or die trying. There are 4 encampments, here, here, here and here, ANBU intelligence head pointed on the tactical map. The strengths and dispositions are on the reports. ANBU operations head turned to Danzo, who nodded. Since the ninja groups were going to be made completely of men from their departments, they were going to be in charge of the actual execution. We've read the reports, he said. Good, Sarutobi said. We'll leave the force on the left flank pass unmolested. They're large enough that we can claim sufficient provocation for war, and it'll give us the numbers to crush the other 3 utterly. Show no mercy. Hunt them all down and kill them. Execute those who surrendered after the battle. We want to crush our enemies, Koharu added. We expect some civilian casualties and damage to infrastructure, but the activated reserves and the regulars should be up to the job, ANBU operations head told his listeners. We'll herd them into the old Uchiha compound, set it on fire and pound them for good measure, the head of reserves added. ANBU operations nodded in agreement. Massive collateral and excellent propaganda. Yes. Sealed orders to Kakashi, Guy, and a few other trusted jounin on the morning of the exams, Sarutobi said, handing over several packets to ANBU intelligence. Ensure that it's delivered to them on time. Any questions? There was none. Commanders on the ground have the final word. Godspeed and good hunting. Long live the will of fire. Long live Konoha. The caravan halted 2 miles from Forest 2177. As the crew rushed about the task of securing the mules, setting up camp, getting the campfire started and the numerous other things that needed to be done, the ostensible civilian leader of the expedition looked towards the woods on the right. The dark, thick forest looked quite forbidding in the evening twilight. We move at 1 tomorrow morning and hit the bastards at 4:30. Make sure the men are wearing armor under their clothes tonight, Shark, the leader said, staring at the terrain for tomorrow's battle long and hard. The edge of the woodland was about an hour away for a unit marching in the dark, but it'd take another 2 hours moving silently to reach the enemy camp. Full load, Commander, the XO asked. The leader shook his head. Full load of shuriken and other expendables, Squirrel. Leave everything else behind except armor, weapons, water and a high-energy ration pack per man. We'll breakfast on the march. We'll also take a single team of medics with us into the forest. The men will piggyback the heavy equipment on a rotating basis. The rest of the medics will set up here. Detail squads 3 and 4 to their security. Squirrel nodded thoughtfully. Who should take point? The Hunternin. They're more experienced at this kind of quiet work in the dark than the rest of the force. Order of battle as per plan? Yes. Let's not make too many changes on the eve of the battle. Have the team leaders spread around and talk to the men. Give them motivational speeches and whatnot. You aren't going to, sir? Oh, we are, Squirrel, Shark corrected, we are. At around 12 that very night, Kabuto stared at the report before him in the security of his room. It did not make sense. It was less than 2 days to the finals and Konoha was frenzied with activity, as expected. However, the eve of the exams was no time to move medical inventory caches when foreign shinobi were around to observe and report back on their locations to their village. It made even less sense to move them to the vicinity of the ruins of the Uchiha clan. But that was exactly what was being done by the medic corps. Furthermore, Kabuto thought, the office of Hokage hadn't reacted at all to quell those pernicious rumors that started about a week back about Orochimaru making another appearance during the finals. Kabuto's former classmates had drawn his attention to it twice so far. None of the facts available on hand made sense. The subtle positioning of highly reliable, battle-hardened and decorated ANBU squadrons on the walls, the movement of caches, the Hokage's verifiable apathy. Something didn't smell right, and if Kabuto didn't know about the ANBU detachments dispatched to cater to the whims of the daimyo, the traitorous genin made a mental note to have his mentor thank the foolish ruler for weakening Konoha, so after they burned the village to the ground, he would have thought that the leaf was preparing for a battle within the city. Or maybe, realization dawned on the treasonous medic Nin as he probed the problem further, they were. The idea was far-fetched and neither Kabuto nor Orochimaru had ever given it any serious thought, but what if Konoha was aware of the Otosuna conspiracy from the very beginning? And what if the daimyo was in the know and made the request for ANBU so that Leaf could mobilize its reserves without raising suspicion, thus freeing up the active ANBU units for what they did best? Attack the enemy as only the best shock troops in the whole world can. Kabuto stood up. He was not shaken, but he was less sure of his mentor's grandiose plans than he had been only a few minutes earlier. He would discuss this with Orochimaru, but only after sending couriers to the individual camps to ascertain the status on the ground. For if he was right, they had precious little time in their hands before the shit well and truly hit the fan. The march had taken place in relative quiet. Asking for complete silence from 4 companies of armed men in the dark was the height of stupidity. Finally, when the Konoha assault force was less than 300 meters from the enemy camp, Shark ordered a brief halt for a final breather and to give his lieutenants time to organize their troops. The assault, when it came, would be all the more effective for the organization. Normally, the veteran commander wouldn't have dared act in such a manner during any operation, much less one so critical to Konoha's safety as the current one, where achieving complete tactical surprise was so critical to success, but he'd received word from the vanguard earlier that gave him the confidence. The Hunter-nin had successfully entrapped the enemy sentries, both the ones holding static posts and on patrol on the camp perimeter in genjutsus, and thus, neutralized the enemy perimeter. Total surprise was Konoha's, and damn the Leaf Ninja Corps would be if Shark and his men did not use it to full effect. The Hunter-nin took out the innermost ring of sentries in the camp first. Their victims were garrote and knifed, pin-cushioned with senbon, or had their spines half-severed by the throwing axes that some of the ANBU and their Hunter-nin brethren preferred. One after other, the guards fell with nary a sound. But one thing that could always be trusted to happen on the field was for something to go wrong. Fortunately, the genjutsus had been so skillfully applied that the sentries were really lost to the world. So, even the lone Hunter-nin who missed his quarry completely because the man turned away at the last instant got a second chance to take out his target. No one who witnessed the botched kill had any doubt that the Hunter-nin would be the butt of jokes from his cellmates for months to come. Still, they were all silently glad for small mercies. It would have made for a very bloody and terrifying battle in the dark if someone had raised the alarm, after all. Once the Hunter-nin signaled the successful elimination of the last of the perimeter guards, the companies stealthily moved into assault positions under the guidance of their commanders. Hidden by the shadows cast by healthy branches that provided the overhead cover under the starlit sky, they waited silently as seconds ticked by and the minute hand swung ever closer to the agreed-upon time for the attack. At -15 seconds, the company commanders swung their arms down as one and every third man stepped out of the tree line. They clutched in their hands little spheres. These weapons were Konoha's latest innovation in the battlefield. They'd been developed only months earlier by an ANBU recovering at the hospital after a mission gone south, which was one reason why there weren't that many of the devices to go around. At -10, the exposed men formed seals with their free hands and activated the exploding seals within the spheres. At -5, they ran 3 paces and lobbed the bombs as they'd been trained at the sleeping forms of the enemy. Well, all but one did. The lone exception caught his foot on an exposed root and fell down. As a result, when all the volunteers hit the ground, just to be on the safe side, so did everyone within many meters of the Slippy. This action took 3 seconds. Simultaneously, as the spheres reached the apex of their brief flight, the remaining hidden Konoha shinobi slid into ready-to-sprint positions to charge the enemy, the bodies and the doubtless naked weapons on the ground between them and the enemy be damned. Archers, those ninja specially designated for the purpose, shot flare arrows set on delay seals high into the sky. Those would hang in the air for several minutes and provide the minimum necessary illumination for the attack. The spherical grenades, little more than tightly bound masses of wire wrapped around a core of 4 special explosive seals padded by cotton, exploded. Some burst in the air and some on the ground. A few even bounced off the bodies of slumbering enemies before exploding. One unwary shinobi was hit on his crotch and another on his head. In both cases, the unfortunate victims died. The former because the bomb exploded as it bounced off the newly neutered man's crotch, and the latter because the hit crushed its victim's skull even before it exploded. The wannabe invaders inside the camp proper numbered more than 300. With one exception, and that too an officer who was writing up a report in his tent, they were all asleep when the bombs went off. But 300 men need a lot of space to sleep, even lying side by side, which the enemy was not. They were spread out in squads over a large area. However, each of the grenades had a kill radius of 10 meters. And there were a lot of grenades. Not enough to saturate the whole clearing, of course, but even if there were, no one could lob them that far anyways. But there was more than enough to decimate the ranks of shinobi closest to the tree line. Supersonic fragments of red-hot wire from the explosions mowed down whole squads, slicing through armor as if it were tissue paper and drilling deep into the flesh underneath. Men who'd been asleep only moments before woke screaming as the pain of torn bodies and lost appendages registered through the fog of sleep. The tents farthest from the Konoha troops, the ones untouched by the rain of explosions, burst open even as the clap of the last explosion resonated through the clearing. The troops inside those tents may have been caught by surprise, but they reacted as only experienced, well-drilled soldiers can, and dozens upon dozens of half-dressed men spewed out into the cold early morning air. Unfortunately for them, their emergence from the tents coincided with the ignition of the flares, which went off with bright flashes in the sky. For one regrettable instant, the men subconscious rode roughshod over their training and their eyes were drawn to the bright lights against their will. As mistakes happen, it was a fairly minor one. It was a testament to the enemy's training that their conscious minds almost resisted the urgings of their subconscious. However, that one mistake, be it so small, was a deadly one when compounded by their otherwise almost perfect reaction in this context. After all, more battles are won or lost by things that almost went one way but did not. Earlier, on the Konoha side, after quietly breaching the camp perimeter, Shark had ordered the commander of the Hunterine vanguard to the enemy's rear as a blocking force. Now, however, seeing the chaos in the enemy ranks, the Hunterine commander sensed a great opportunity. The wannabe invaders were disoriented and an attack from the rear would throw them into further disarray. If she and her men could hold the enemy's attention a few seconds before the main body of the Konoha force fell on them, the effects would be devastating, both in terms of casualties and its impact on the enemy's morale. Why, if the coming blow was powerful enough, and with Shark wielding the hammer, she had no reason to doubt it wouldn't be, it could quite possibly destroy the enemy's confidence and shatter them, turning the battle into a rout. Hunterine rule, she screamed the Hunterine motto at her men as an impromptu war cry, while it pricked her sense of professionalism to shout what was in effect a warning to the enemy. She could not risk any hesitation or delay from her men in following her lead or her plan was shot, unleashing a powerful Karyu Enden at the center of the enemy mass. She chose the fire dragon technique for though it wasn't quite as effective as those newfangled infernal grenades, fire is unparalleled as a psychological weapon. As men scattered, their eyes drawn to their comrades who were even now burning to death, the other Hunterine shot their own flame attacks and rushed the invaders, charging against better than 15-1 odds. Not all of the enemy were immobilized by the human torches, however, and the ones that weren't retaliated with powerful elemental attacks. Lightning streaked, flames flared and water shot through the air and 5 of the Hunterine went down before the survivors of the charge smashed into the ranks of the enemy. 2 more died within the next half a dozen seconds, struck down by multiple blows from various opponents. The last few bleeding survivors clumped together to guard each other's backs, but as the enemy made to close in and kill them, Shark's force fell on the foreign Nin from their other rear. Konoha's charge did not go completely unnoticed, but archers on the flank seized the opportunity and shot many of the enemy who reacted to the latest and greatest threat. A trained shinobi bereft of a sword or a staff could usually block half a dozen arrows under perfect conditions. With a staff, they could even erect an impenetrable barrier. But a battlefield at night echoing with the screams of the wounded and the dying, the cries of despair from the losers, and the wordless exhortations of victors is hardly optimal terrain. It took an exceptional ninja to stop even a single arrow in the midst of such chaos, a fact that the archers capitalized on, but as it happened, there were two among those that responded to Konoha's charge. Both fell before they could warn their comrades, suffering bad cases of instant death from ninjato through their heart, however. They were the victims of Konoha Anbu who'd braved the hail of arrows and risked their lives to buy their comrades a few more precious seconds. One of the Anbu assailants was hit in the shoulder by an arrow meant for his victim and went down with his prey in a bad fall that literally tore his shoulder apart and bled him out within minutes. Still, the brave actions of those two Anbu and the Hunterine charge bought Shark and his men the time they needed to close ranks with the enemy. Shark himself led from the front, stabbing three who had their backs turned to him before he lost his sword lodged into the third one's spine. He made no attempt to rescue the blade, however, grabbing hold of one of his kunai and stabbing a fourth one, who had somehow reacted in time to block against another Anbu's sword strike, in the neck. The unknown ninja fell down gurgling. His immediate area clear, Shark took a moment to look around. Everywhere within eyesight, dozens fell as Anbu made mincemeat of opponents who had their backs turned to them. The pace of battle was too fast and the enemy too close for any of the enemy officers to establish order, especially since anyone who tried to rally the surviving invaders was singled out for elimination, or the men to resist effectively. Within a minute, the survivors lost whatever fight they had. Many put up their hands in surrender, but a few tried to escape or were too blinded by panic to think straight and tried to flee in a rout. All the runners were shot down by arrows or hunted down by the Anbu stationed on the flanks before they got far. And just like that, it was over. The battle had lasted less than 15 minutes, if one counted the elimination of the sentries, less than 2 of which involved fighting and the rest movement. For most of the men under Shark's command, it was more akin to a pigeon shoot than anything else, a fact that the grizzled veterans in the units were forever thankful for. Shark allowed himself a smile savoring the win as he wiped his kunai and retrieved his sword. It was as good a victory as he'd ever dreamed. Better even, as he'd only lost a few men dead or wounded in the melee. When Shark finally looked around after cleaning and sheathing his sword, he saw that his lieutenants were already setting up perimeter security, organizing hunting parties to bring down the few strays that had escaped and litters for the wounded, and securing the POWs. Making his way around, he wondered how the battle would have turned out without a competent command or without such brave shinobi to fight under him. Badly, he was sure. It was a sweet battle, sir, one of the Anbu in Shark's path said. Shark nodded. It was indeed, as battles where you got to kick the shit out of the other guy often were. With brave men like you, he said in a loud voice full of braggadocio for the benefit of all Anbu within hearing range, waving generally at the clearing, it'd take better men than weak pussies from Suna and Oto to give us a good fight. The men cheered. Shark smiled and waved gallantly at them. We routed them, boys. The best that 2 villages had to offer and we whooped them good. But our job isn't done yet. Secure the prisoners and attend to the wounded. Don't slack off on security now that we've crossed the biggest hurdle. We'll have plenty of time for booze and pussy when we get home. All of you will get your combat bonus and a pat on the back for a job well done. Till then, stand firm and do your duty. Dismissed. There was a bigger cheer this time, because of the bonus and the prospect of getting laid, and not merely from the clump of men nearest to the Anbu commander. Shark nodded at them and at Squirrel, who'd made his approach in the middle of the speech. The men drifted back to their work. Everything's in hand, sir, Squirrel reported, or will be pretty soon. The last of the POWs will be trussed up in a wee while. Perimeter security? We're working on it. Queer is working on the patrol roster even as we speak to better use the manpower we have. Who was the hardest hit? The Hunterine blocking force. Practically none from the main force except for a few walking wounded here and there, and those were mostly blue on blue. Once we were at their neck, they couldn't use any of the heavy ninjutsu and there were very few casualties in the main attack. Our intelligence indicated the invaders would mostly be made of shinobi from the regular forces. They aren't accustomed to the shock tactics we favor. We got off lightly even still. Thank God we got the goddamn Suna shinobi contingent with the grenades. The ones at the far end were the Odo fuckers. Yes, we did, Shark acknowledged. He was glad they'd caught the Suna ninja with their pants down. He'd fought them once in a pitched battle during the Yondaime's time and had the scars to remember. The hidden sand bastards were tough comers. We'd better get to work. Do I dare spare the time to meet the wounded now? You can, sir. Still, Shark hesitated. It felt wrong to not be out there, issuing commands to bring order to the post-battle confusion. But that's what happens when you have competent subordinates who knew their job. Ultimately, he decided he would stay out and not muddle things. There wasn't anything he could spot that needed his attention anyways. And even if there was, he'd learned in the months he'd worked with his command team that they were confident enough to ask for help without hesitation when they needed it. Flanked by Squirrel sometime later, Shark faced the survivors of the Hunter Nin whose bravery and sacrifice had saved so many lives. 3 lived of the original 12. Whose idea was it? He asked out of curiosity. Our CO, one of the survivors said, shifting in his seat, wincing at the pain the slight movement brought him. Another pointed at a badly mutilated body of their dead leader laid out horizontally on the ground nearby. There were 4 great wounds on her body, any of which would have been fatal without immediate medical attention, of which there was none. She was brave. You saved a lot of lives today, Shark said. The Hunter Nin shrugged. I don't think it makes a difference to her. She's dead as dead can be, he sighed regretfully at the loss. The woman had been a good leader and a fine Hunter Nin. Then, straightening, thank you, sir. We were only doing our duty. Shark nodded. I'm putting all your names for commendation. The names of your dead go on the memorial stone. Bear the discomfort for a little while longer, boys. The litter bearers should be back from their runs any minute now. We can fight, sir, one of the Hunter Nin objected. I have no doubt, Shark agreed with the man, but I have no lack of bodies today. Certainly more than enough to complete the other aspects of the mission. Be at ease that no one would question your bravery or your comrades. Not after today, anyhow. The Hunter Nin nodded and leaned back against the trunk he'd been using as a prop to remain seated. For all his bravado, He-Man had a stab wound in his leg and the bandage on his head was soaked with blood. Shark met his gaze for a second more and with a profound nod of respect turned away to the other task that needed doing. Squirrel dutifully followed his commander to the POWs. Kabuto sent 4 couriers on his fact-finding mission. 1 for each of the troop staging areas. Of the 4, only the courier headed for the staging area on the left flank made it to his objective. The other 3 did not. 2 never saw another sunrise again. The courier for Forest 2177 ran as fast as his experienced legs could take him through the dark. He took insane risks in the discharge of his duty and having taken but 2 breaks in the course of the long run, was at the end of his reserves by the time he neared his destination. He knew he'd need at least an hour to recoup his reserves for the run back once he made contact with the main body of the Oto-Suna combined force. The courier spotted the Konoha ANBU before the other spotted him. There were 3 ANBU and they were trotting, bearing a litter for one of their wounded comrades. The sight of the Konoha Nin brought the courier to a grinding halt. He didn't panic exactly, but he made a stupid decision. Instead of continuing on under his present heading for a little while and then circling around, he instantly tried to turn and run back the way he'd come. Not 5 steps on, the courier's foot found a depression and he crashed noisily on the nearby brush. Most unfortunately for him, the ANBU heard his fall. The courier was as good as dead from that point. Not only was his pursuer a Hyuga whose eyes worked equally well night or day, he was also mostly fresh. The courier had neither night vision nor the stamina to run for long, being as he was, mostly exhausted. Less than a minute into the chase, the courier was hit by 3 shuriken meant to cripple him and fell down. The ANBU fully intended to interrogate the man and find out all he knew. Luckily for the courier, for it'd have been torture and lots of it if he'd been caught alive, he broke his skull against a half-buried rock in the nasty fall. He never regained consciousness and slipped into a final coma minutes later. The other unlucky courier did not fall prey to ANBU. His fate was far more mundane. Straying off the beaten path, he stepped over a log and got bitten by a viper less than an hour from Konoha. In the dark, he mistook the bite for a scratch. By the time he realized something was wrong, he was too far from civilization. He tried to make for the merchant trail, but failed. His body was not found until after the exams. The last courier was detained by a suspicious chunin manning the east gate on the wall. They put him in a cell right enough, but because it was such a busy time for the whole village, Police HQ decreed that they could not be bothered and pointed their fingers at ANBU torture and interrogation, who pointed right back at the cops. In the end, after a set to with ANBU torture and interrogation, an irritated HQ sent a single detective to question the suspect. The detective was irked himself, having been called away from a fine lunch. He was in an even bigger hurry to get back, and so, around 3 in the afternoon, the courier found himself out on the streets. A whole night and half a day spent fretting about all the horrible torture that the ANBU would no doubt inflict on his person was wasted. Still, as afraid as the courier was of Konoha ANBU, Kabuto, the sadist, frightened him a whole lot more. Fearing for his life for failing his assigned duty, he made his way to Orochimaru's gentle-seeming right hand as soon as he was released. The dead were sealed for transport, and ANBU had borne some of the wounded enemy Nin for treatment. Shark looked at the POWs squatting glumly before him in a rough circle under the watchful eyes of his ANBU. He supposed he should feel sorry for these men who'd been led astray by their commanders, but they were invaders in his country. He had to judge them by the right perspective as one whose land would have been invaded and family endangered. Like all his comrades, Shark knew that if Konoha hadn't wised up to Orochimaru's plans, chances were these defeated, forlorn-looking men and women would have run amok within the walls of the village, indulging in wanton murder, pillage, rape and arson. In that case, he shuddered to think of the Leaf's plight if her forces hadn't been enough to send the enemy packing. So, Shark would do unto them as they would have done unto him and his. "It's been a dry year, folks," he addressed the crowd, staring one of the few Oto Nin who still had fight in them in his eyes, "but this is the land of fire. And as its citizens, you should know that we respect the rule of land and expect our people to be law-abiding." Blank looks all around from Oto Nin who'd taken their eyes off the ground. "I know the life of a farmer is hard," Shark continued, "but that's not an excuse." More blank looks. Shark could read the thoughts running through their minds. What was the madman raving about? "You're all guilty of banding together and preying on the weak and the innocent, knowing fire does not condone banditry. Thus, it falls upon me to enforce the law as the most senior of the lawfully appointed representatives of the daimyo present." Blank looked still, though the gleam of realization and the certainty of their fates dawned on a few Oto Nin, as did a low moan of despair. Their manacles blocked access to chakra, and without it, restrained as they were, there was nothing the surrendered shinobi could do to escape. The POW holding eye contact with Shark was one of them. The Konoha commander did not flinch at the hatred in his eyes. He kept the eye contact even as he uttered the next few words. "Execute them, boys." Immediately, the ANBU commander designated for the task slammed his hand against the ground and performed a Yomi Numa on the POWs. As the last of the prisoners, wounded and otherwise, disappeared, he made the necessary seals and closed the impromptu mass grave. "Kabuto, you worry too much," Orochimaru spoke dismissively upon hearing the latter's misgivings for the second time in less than a day. Kabuto knew that when Orochimaru made up his mind about something, he rarely changed it. It was one of the quirks of the man. So brilliant in most things and yet, so set in his ways and unwilling to consider he could be wrong. Ever. Normally, Kabuto would give up and let Orochimaru commit his folly before intervening, but this was the Hidden Leaf, the strongest shinobi village in the land. In all probability, they wouldn't make it if the cat was out of the bag and the shit hit the fan. Orochimaru-sama, please. Only one of the 3 runners who made it outside the walls has returned. I fear for operational security. You forget your place, aide, Orochimaru replied, his smile morphing into a scowl and reminding his subordinate of his position. Then, with a leer, if you're right, none of the runners would have been detained. The very fact that one of them was detained, and need I remind you the man was let out of jail after only cursory questioning, tells me your theory is just that. A theory, but with no founding on reality. Kabuto did not reply. Seeing his right hand's pout, it wasn't literally a pout but Orochimaru recognized the signs from long association. The Sannin decided to climb a few steps notches to mollify Kabuto and win him over. Konoha does not know, he said in a reconciliatory voice. Konoha could not know. I have gone to extraordinary lengths to keep my plans secret, as have you. I'm sure that Sarutobi Sensei suspects, but his village is gearing for war against T. Do not confuse preparation for that campaign with preparations for us. Kabuto had his doubts, but he nodded. He didn't think he was mistaken, but it was also true that intelligence networks in neither Tsunade nor Oto had reported oddities that could support his claims in the months before. For that matter, aside from that rumor making the round, and neither had he, loyal, genin, but that wasn't incontrovertible evidence either. The crucial information was way over his pay grade, after all. He supposed it was possible that both networks were hopelessly compromised and he'd been played for a fool. The evidence on the ground suggested that was the case, but it could very well be the other way around and he was making a mountain out of a molehill. But whatever be the case, Kabuto thought with an eerie smile, the die was cast. He knew the risks of the game when he threw his lot with the Sannin. Whatever happened, he would see his task through the end. Jiraiya, Koharu said neutrally, pointing the Sannin to a chair. Jiraiya made a nod of acknowledgement and claimed his seat. He'd been smuggled into the village with great care in a cart full of rice bushels meant for the finals. Sarutobi couldn't meet you. He's busy entertaining the visiting nobles. The fallout from day after tomorrow from their camp is going to be bad, the old advisor elaborated. Understandable. I was told that I'd be briefed today. And so you shall. We suspect Orochimaru and or the Kazekage will try to assassinate Sarutobi during the finals. The boy hates his teacher. We've planned accordingly. We believe we're on top of the situation and our contingency plans are sound. Ha! So long as we get the rat bastard. Koharu nodded. We think we'll have both Orochimaru and the Kazekage contained, she continued, but we're concerned about the latter's Jinchuriki-son. If the boy were to unleash his demon within the walls of the village. I'll handle him. Konoha can handle a Jinchuriki, Koharu replied snidely, we have the most powerful one of them, after all. And there's also Orochimaru's experiment and the Shodai's legacy. We think he is just as effective as the first against demons. But that's beside the point. We cannot have one of the tailed beasts running amok within the village, Jiraiya. The toad Sannin nodded. Even more importantly, it's no longer in Konoha's interests to have the one tail in Tsunade's hands. 2 weeks from now, the whole world is going to learn of Hidden Sand's greatly weakened state and everyone's going to want a piece of the pie. Before that, we want to secure the biggest slice for ourselves. This is the Hokage's will. As the Hokage commands, Jiraiya replied, formulaically. Then, in a less serious voice, I'll see if I can seal the boy before he channels the beast. If he does, I may have to resort to extreme measures within the stadium. Koharu did not hesitate at all. Of course. We don't care how it's done so long as the Jinchuriki and the demon are neutralized with minimal fuss. To tell you the truth, I think the Shodai's legacy is better suited for this duty myself, Jiraiya added, probing for any hint as to what machinations drove the decision to foist the beast on his shoulders. So he is, but we want you to do it. Jiraiya's eyes narrowed slightly. It was clear that Sarutobi and his inner council wanted him to look good before the village. That did not bode good tidings for his favorite pastime and his writing career. If he knew the old coots, and he knew all four pretty well, they were sure to have sent the Shodai's legacy away on some mission or the other so that he could not refuse his out of hand. Sneaky, underhanded, manipulative old geezers. I suppose the man's out of town, he asked, just to be sure. Koharu shot him a smile, but given her age, it came out as something truly horrible. It was all the more frightening because it was meant to be a cherubic, butter wouldn't melt in my mouth, smile. Indeed, he is. How did you guess? She lied through her teeth. The Shodai's legacy was hidden away inside the village near the stadium in case the Sannin refused. Jiraiya groaned inwardly. Yep, the old farts had it in for him. 15 hours to finals. Tora, the commander of the Otosuna force, frowned at the dark horizon. There was no sign of the other units that were supposed to rendezvous with his. Still, he wasn't too much worried. He knew the trouble his fellow commanders faced, coordinating between Oto and Suna Shinobi. He knew, also, the difficulties in secretly moving such a large troop of men so close to a shinobi village. Even treehugger Paradise Konoha. It wouldn't surprise him at all if some of the others didn't make it in time for the assault, busy as the roads to Konoha were so close to the exams. Certainly, there were bound to be leaf ninja disguised as civilians among the wayfarers. If the Otosuna force used the main roads, even split into small groups, the treehugger spies would note the disappearance of large numbers of visitors so close to the gates and raise the alarm. That would not do at all. There's still a whole night ahead of us. If the others don't show up, I'll just have to scale back the scope of my mission. And write a scathing report to Orochimaru on the issue of punctuality in military operations, he muttered aloud, a wry smile on his face. Of the other three commanders, two were Suna Shinobi and one was Tora's foremost political adversary within Oto. He would love to be done with that bastard forever. When the quality inspector asked to examine the cisterns that fed the stadium, the manager saw no reason to object. There had been constant inspections on everything by the Hokage's special appointees stretching back for more than a month. Nor did he find it strange that the oldster asked for a ladder to check the quality of the water. After that, it was simply a matter of a skillfully applied genjutsu and the inspector, an ex-NBU commander, gently retrieved the packages from the seal and with a minor application of ninjutsu, dissolved them in the water, one to a tank. Kakashizan, the ANBU, greeted the bleary-looking jounin. Kakashi glared. It was 3 a.m. and he needed his bloody sleep. It'd better be important, he growled. The ANBU handed a sealed parchment and disappeared. Kakashi closed the door, switched on the light, read the communique and like any veteran, promptly went back to sleep. There was still time to get things done and he needed all the sleep he could get for the day ahead. It was 7 a.m. and Team 7 were assembled at their training ground for some last-minute instruction from Kakashi. The latter, for the first time in the team's long association with the jounin, was on time. Sakura kept looking up to see if the sky was falling down. Naturally, her teammates found it very funny, though their teacher did not. You have 2 hours before the finals, he told them in a solemn voice. The 3 of you have come far in the last month, but there is still a long way to go. Team 7 glanced at each other and nodded. Be on the lookout for trouble, the jounin continued. I'm concerned about Orochimaru. I'm sure you've heard the rumors making the rounds about him and the finals. We've no, Kakashi-sensei, Sakura replied, and we thank you for your concern. But is there any basis to your concerns? Sasuke asked. Kakashi did not hesitate for even a fraction of a second. His mind was already made up and it was too late in the game to be much worried about operational security. All pieces were certainly on the board by now and there was little time for Orochimaru and his friends to react. Yes, there is. Suna and Odo planned to attack us during the exams, he said, holding up an arm to stall any questions. We've known this for a while and we've been preparing in secret. You should not repeat this to your friends. I wouldn't tell you, except for the fact that operational prudence requires it. Naruto noted the reactions of his teammates out of the corner of his eyes. Apparently, they felt the same way he did. What are your orders, sensei? He asked in a flat voice. Attack his home and family, with the foreign bastards? He would see about that. Eliminate the enemy finalists. Spare your Konoha brethren if possible. My orders to you are as follows: eliminate the Kazekage's youngest son with prejudice. I don't care if he ends up dead or alive so long as he ceases to be a factor during the attack. Naruto nodded thoughtfully as he pondered the problem. Then, his face lit up as an idea from one of the innumerable scrolls Kakashi forced him to read hit him. Will do, sensei, he replied, and I know just the thing to crush the bastard, too. The Jounin nodded. One last piece of advice. I most probably won't be there to watch over you. So, remember to stick together and watch each other's backs. Team 7 smiled collectively. They were family and they would live or die together as one. Now, let's to breakfast. I'm famished, Kakashi said. It looked to be a hot day and most spectators had arrived early to secure the best seats for the day's spectacle. Combined with the raucous celebration and the salty snacks sold by hawkers at a cheap price, the last subsidized heavily by the village for some reason, pretty much everyone who hadn't packed bottles of water before setting out from home had been to the public fountains at least once for a drink or two. At precisely 9 a.m., Jounin Genma, the official referee, signaled the doorman to push the massive wooden door open and walked out into the daylight. A hush fell upon the crowd as Genma made his way to the middle of the field with cold, measured, unhurried steps. Once at the center, he threw up his arms and walked a tight circle, his face turned towards the crowd. Exalted and honored daimyo of Fire Country, he announced, modulating his voice to carry across the stadium, Kage of Leaf and Kage of Wind, noble guests, fellow citizens, and all those who've come from near and far to watch the spectacle of your lifetime, I present you the finals of the Chunin exams. I'm Jounin Genma, your host and referee for the next hours as young shinobi from across the nations fight for honor, glory and promotion to Chunin. The crowd burst into applause with cheers, whistles and what-not. Genma waited for it to die down. The first match of the day. Naruto of the Leaf vs. Gaara of the Sand. The two combatants made their way to the center of the field and faced off against each other. Gaara glared hatred at the boy before him. Mother whispered in his head about how yearned for this Naruto's blood, and how she couldn't wait to embrace him and deliver his bloody pulp into death's loving hands. Silence descended upon the ground as Genma intentionally delayed announcing the start of the match to build anticipation among the spectators. In the meanwhile, the two Jinchuriki stared each other in the eye. Gaara's promised death and Naruto's held nothing. Genma announced the start of the match with a piercing cry. Naruto moved. Gaara stood passively, his sand swirling madness around him as Naruto the Fool charged him headfirst at a jog. Mother would grab the blonde bag of flesh and blood and crush him like a puny insect. She would paint the ground crimson. As if sensing Mother's mood and her terrible purpose, a flight of birds screeched to the right, raising an unholy racket. Gaara turned towards the birds. He wanted to see them. He knew for certain that Mother would handle the blonde all on her own. He needn't bother paying any attention to his opponent. Naruto took that moment to shift into high gear. Gaara caught a bright flash of bright light and crackling arcs of actinic streaking towards him at blinding speed. The world went mad. Baki watched the whole event unfold before his eyes with morbid interest. 1 second, Gaara's opponent was charging headfirst into certain death. The very next, there was another copy of him straddling the enclosure with summoned lightning in his hands. Kakashi's infamous Raikiri, the lightning cutter. But the Raikiri is an imperfect tool if you wanted to surprise someone. For one thing, it was unbelievably loud. For another, it had an enormous appetite for chakra and could eat through the largest reserves with terrifying ease. Finally, the user had to be super fast to use it effectively or its standoff distance became very limited. Baki hoped for just a moment that the Konoha genin had made a mistake. True, Gaara and his sand had a weakness against lightning-based attacks, but his involuntary defense mechanism's reaction speed was inhumanly fast, as many a wannabe assassin sent by the Kazekage had discovered before. Only, Kakashi's student did not give Gaara time to even register his presence before he attacked. Gaara's sand did react, but then, as Baki and everyone else in the stadium discovered, the Kazekage's son had never been the boy's target. The real target wasn't even the disintegrating propane tank, which surprise. Yet another Naruto swapped with the first one inside the stadium, who'd incidentally closed the distance with Gaara. The cylinder had 14 kilograms of liquid propane. Naruto had applied a fast-acting seal once favored by ANBU for making entries during missions. The seal worked by weakening the molecular bonds of crystals, making designated points vulnerable to forced entry. It was mostly useless in the modern world, however, and fallen into disuse since it was easily shielded against with cheap counter seals. The cylinder under question did not have the counters. A fraction of a second after the Kawarimi and about a second after Naruto activated it, the cylinder blew apart, unable to contain the propane under high pressure any longer as its structural integrity went the way of the dodo. Instantly, the area near Gaara was saturated with high inflammable propane. The scene was set for a fuel-air explosion and Naruto supplied the final ingredient with his Raikiri. The resultant explosion was a piece of hell on earth. Naruto's clone was carbonized instantly. Gaara's sand, which had protected him from other explosions set off by his father's assassins before, failed miserably against the longer duration overpressure and heat impulse. The Kazekage's son was thrown violently through the air. He pinwheeled against the ground multiple times without the benefit of the protection offered by his sand shroud and slammed hard against the hard granite wall of the enclosure. He fell, coughing blood and bleeding from his ears, and did not get on his feet for many seconds. Even when he did, he staggered as if he were punch-drunk from a concussion and promptly vomited his breakfast. Jounin Genma, who'd been spared having his innards liquefied only because yet another of Naruto's clones switched places with a Kawarimi, jumped back into the arena as soon as the rain of debris from the explosion stopped. The crowd watched him expectantly from the edge of their seats. Absolute silence reigned. Genma looked at Gaara, whose sand whipped hither and thither like a drunk. The boy was clearly unable to continue the fight. He then turned to the Uzumaki, who'd also joined the referee on the field. The best thing, as far as the Jounin was concerned, was that Naruto looked ready to finish what he'd started, though he was clearly surprised that his opponent survived that holocaust, and was holding back only out of respect for the referee. Genma shook his head, a wry smile etched on his face and shot a look of profound respect towards the Leaf Genin. The ruthlessness, foresight and premeditation in that cold-blooded assassination attempt, his actions could be classified as nothing else, was worthy of an experienced ANBU and exemplified the best traditions of the group. The boy was a credit to his mentor, ex-ANBU commander Hitaki Kakashi, and to the village, and the Jounin had no doubt he would go far as a shinobi. Winner, Uzumaki Naruto. And the crowd burst into applause. A startling upset, Kazekage-sama, Sarutobi said with a shake of his head. Orochimaru, masquerading as the Kazekage, blinked. He'd thought the boy was cold-blooded in the forest, but that little demonstration just now was something else. The Sannin could only hope that the boy rubbed off some of his magic on his teammates before they came looking for him. Why, with shinobi like that, he'd brush aside the Akatsuki like the irritating insects they are. Yes, very, he answered absent-mindedly. Sarutobi smiled wryly. Naruto-kun is one of our most promising up-and-coming shinobi, he explained, reaching over for the clay jug and pouring out a glass of refreshingly cold water. He took a sip and sighed. Yep, clay jugs make for the best water. Orochimaru, who'd been waiting all day for the Hokage to take the first sip, helped himself to a glass as well. It fit the late Kazekage's reputation for paranoia to have his host drink first and verify the water was untainted. Kabuto, hidden under the robes of a very unfortunate Anbu, shook his head softly. No one, not even him, had expected the Suna Jinchuriki to be taken out so easily. In less than a minute, Uzumaki Naruto, the self-proclaimed #1 prankster and most unpredictable ninja in Konoha, had taken out Orochimaru-sama's trump card for the coming battle within the village walls and thrown the biggest monkey wrench ever into the invasion plans. Today's going to be a very interesting day. And that's if everything goes according to plan. Kabuto did not even wonder about what had happened if something else went south with the mission. The consequences did not bear thinking. Naruto walked into the balcony with a huge smile on his face. He promptly high-fived Sasuke and Sakura. His teammates were just as exultant as he was at his victory. The Suna siblings stared at Team 7 and especially Naruto with no little amount of fear in their eyes. Because he was feeling especially playful, the Uzumaki pointed at the Kazekage's next son, pantomimed a slit throat and mouthed, "You're next." He was rewarded with the funniest look ever for his efforts. "Oh, that's fucking priceless," he guffawed, pointing rudely at the puppeteer again while his teammates and Temari watched clueless. They'd missed Naruto's original threat and Kankuro's deer-caught-in-headlights reaction, and did not get the joke. Baki entered then. He was followed by 2 medics and stretcher-bearers carrying a badly hurt Gaara. "What's going on?" he barked at his students. He threw a distasteful glance at the genin who may have succeeded where so many others in Suna had failed for good measure. To hear the medic say it, his youngest charge needed medical attention fast or he was going to die. Baki hated to lose the Jinchuriki, who was such a promising weapon, but the needs of war and village must. Gaara was critical to disrupt the defense, cause enormous property damage, rack up civilian kills and sow chaos from behind enemy lines, and if he died in the pursuit of his duty, so be it. There would be another to take his place once Suna's future was secured, which it would be once Konoha was humiliated and brought to its knees today. Naruto snorted at the look the Jounin shot him and turned back to his teammates and the other gathered Konoha finalists in a calculated insult. Baki bristled at the Uzumaki's gumption. How dare a mere genin turn his back on him as if he, a Jounin, posed no threat to the twerp at all. Compared to the first match, the second one was rather conventional and uninteresting. Not that the crowd didn't devour it like crazy maniacs. Shino fought the only Kusa nin to make it to the finals. The latter was a poison specialist. Shino retreated to the trees on one corner of the arena as soon as the fight was announced. He lost some bugs in the swarming feints he made, but while the Kusa nin was focused on evading and countering the bugs, the Team 8 member replaced himself with his bug bunshin. Then he circled around his opponent and took him from the rear, knocking him out before his opponent realized what had happened. Enthusiasts among the spectators were delirious now. The first match had been an exhibition of ruthless execution, high-powered ninjutsu, and out-of-the-box thinking. None doubted that they'd seen the birth of a new legend in the shinobi community. The second match served as a textbook example on the use of terrain and superior tactics to bring down a deadly opponent. God knew what the third exam would bring. As it happened, the third exam brought a lot of excitement. And not just the good kind. It was clear now that the other 3 groups weren't going to make it for the assault. The fact worried him some, but Tora did not think the enemy knew Orochimaru-sama and Kazekage's intentions. If Konoha did, he had seen no sign of it, nor had he received any warning from his master. Security, in fact, looked pretty relaxed when he wandered into town early in the morning to scout his zone of responsibility. The Oto commander looked at his wristwatch and then at the spotter. It wasn't time yet for the assault, and the watcher shook his head. No flare so far from within the village signaling early commencement of hostilities. So, everything was going according to plan. Well, everything except for the 3 missing units. The thought brought an anticipatory smile on Tora's face. He would cherish his enemy's plight a few days henceforth forever. It was close to 10 a.m. and Hyuga Neji, genius to all, insufferable prick to many an acquaintance, and self-proclaimed victim of the monstrous injustices of fate, faced off against Uchiha Sasuke. Fate has ordained. Neji began, sizing his opponent up. The referee hadn't yet signaled the start of the match. And Neji apparently felt the need to inform his opponent of the pointlessness of struggling against fate. Sasuke wasn't going to give him the satisfaction. Blah blah, he interrupted in his most insufferable voice, is that all you know? Fate this. Fate that. Fuck off, you dumb prick. I'd already heard your speech during the prelims and have no intention of suffering in silence while you stand there going yak at yak. Neji glared at the insult. A few in the audience laughed and a great many sported smirks. The acoustics of the stadium had carried the Hyuga's put down clear and loud. Off to the side, Genma faked a cough and used that as an excuse to hide a smirk of his own. Kakashi had seriously outdone himself with his team. The Jounin recovered from his coughing fit and gave the signal to fight. Sasuke's Sharingan spun a web of lies in his opponent's mind that Neji's Byakugan pierced with ease. However, Sasuke had never meant the Genjutsu to win the fight. It was meant as a distraction and distract Neji, it did. But not enough of one that the braided genin didn't see the trio of shuriken and dodge it in time. Sasuke nodded to himself and circled his opponent at a jog. Holding his center, Neji dutifully followed him with his body. Naruto's speed in that one-sided battle earlier was all the warning he needed to not underestimate his raven-haired teammates. It was hard to believe, and Neji had no idea how he'd done it, but he thought that the blonde might actually be faster than Lee. And neither Naruto nor Sasuke had Lee's disability with chakra. Neji had done his homework and knew that the two boys liked to throw ninjutsu around like crazy. There was a slight shift in Sasuke's bearing as his shoulder muscles flexed and his hip pivoted between steps. His chakra pathways brightened as if getting ready for a push. Neji jumped back. And just in the nick of time, too, as the ground he'd been standing on literally exploded. Sasuke looked Neji in his eyes and smiled cheekily from the bottom of the crater. I was right, Neji thought. Sasuke was as fast as Naruto, though he burned far less chakra for the same speed. But while the raven-haired genin had huge reserves, he was no chakra demon like his teammate. He could not go on expending chakra so extravagantly for long. Not if he wanted to win the fight, which meant Neji had a chance at winning this match. Neji smiled. Orochimaru looked at the hour and sighed. The Sasuke-Neji fight was just getting interesting and he had yet to see Sakura fight. But little things like the destruction of Konoha came first. Oh well. Kabuto flashed through the necessary seals under his ANBU robe as soon as it struck 10 a.m. The powerful Genjutsu sent almost everyone in the stadium to sleep. Once Kabuto made his play, before anyone realized what was happening, Orochimaru's Sound 4, who'd smuggled themselves into the stadium, scaled the Grand Hokage balcony where Sarutobi was seated. Through sheer brute force, they literally pushed the Hokage's ANBU back. Their charge gave the Sannin the time he needed to take his teacher hostage and retreat to the top of the building. The Sound 4 followed their master. They established themselves in each of the four corners and created a barrier so that the Orochimaru could deal with the third undisturbed. This took 5 seconds. Like many ANBU closest to the Grand Hokage balcony, Kabuto made as if he was charging the Oto Nin assaulting it. When one ignorant ANBU closed with him, he calmly casually reached over with his kunai and between steps, slit the man's throat. The ANBU crashed in a tangle of limbs and a spray of blood. Kabuto jumped back to put some distance between himself and the remaining ANBU. He threw his robe away and shot them a beatific smile. The barrier was up and they could not interfere with Orochimaru's hour of reckoning with his master and betrayer. Mission accomplished. Aren't you happy to see me, Sarutobi-sensei? Orochimaru whispered gaily into the Hokage's ears. I've come to reduce this pathetic village to dust and settle a few scores. I think I'll start with slitting your throat. I'm happy, indeed, my stupid, errant apprentice. For today, you die, Sarutobi replied, twisting out of Orochimaru's grasp and landing a few yards away. Orochimaru sneered at his teacher's words and formed the seals to send him into death's cold embrace. Baki looked at sleeping masses and frowned. There were a few Oto/Suna shinobi here and there, but not nearly as many as there should have been. He had barely a moment to realize something had gone terribly wrong when he was forced to dodge to the side as Naruto unleashed a Suryuden inside the balcony. Flipping out of the confined space, he held onto the vertical face of the wall with his chakra to escape the blonde's high-powered jutsu. Then he sped through the seals for the Daitapa and unleashed it in the general direction of the Konoha genin within the balcony, with no regard for the Kazekage's children trapped inside. The immediate priority was to deal with the enemy first. He would worry about the collaterals later. The resultant blowout threw most of the Konoha genin, the two members of Team 7 included, out into the arena. Baki hoisted himself back into the ruined balcony and noted that one of Kenkuro's puppets was severely damaged. It was obvious to him that Konoha knew about the Kazekage's plans all along. Why else would Kakashi's genin attack the Sand Jounin and his team? It was equally obvious that Lead had prepared a trap into which that never sufficiently damned prig and egomaniac Orochimaru had led everyone. If Gaara wasn't out for the count for this battle, Suna could have gained some measure of satisfaction from both Konoha and Orochimaru. But the boy wasn't, and Baki had had no doubt the battle was lost already. The only thing, then, was to mount a rearguard action in hope the siblings would be able to make a successful run for it with Suna's Jinchuriki. The One Tail, above all, could not be allowed to fall into Konoha's hands, or Suna's fate was writ with this disaster. Take Gaara and go. I'll delay them, he ordered Temari and Kankuro. The Sand siblings, the two that were coherent, nodded. Kankuro piggybacked Gaara and Baki ran through the seals for a Karyu Enden and jumped out the balcony for his meeting with fate. One of Jiraiya's battle toads casually blocked the screaming Oto Nin's ninjato and the other disemboweled the man with ease. The attacker collapsed like a sack of shit, his mouth open in a rictus of agony. The Sannin cursed Orochimaru aloud as he stepped over his would-be assailant and gained open air. You could always depend on the traitorous bastard to time things in such a way that it ruined everyone else's day. This time, he'd started his attack right in the middle of the Toad Sannin's 2-minute break to attend the call of nature. It was very fortunate that Jiraiya's godson had punted the little freak to the edge of death's door. Gallant Jiraiya's reputation wouldn't have survived the day if he'd wet his pants in the course of subduing a tailed beast. No one would have accepted the real truth that it was only a case of a bladder filled to bursting and not incontinence brought on by terror. Now, where's that Jinchuriki so that I can deal with him and seal the beast? Hey, kid, Jiraiya asked Naruto, who was standing away from the fight with a Sand Jounin, forming clones as needed and sending them charging in to join the melee. I'm busy, old man, Naruto replied. He recognized Jiraiya of the Sannin from Kakashi's reading materials, but that didn't mean he had to respect the old fart. Not when the man was intent on chatter in the middle of a battle. I can see that, and I won't hold you for long. Where did the Kazekage's children go? Them wimps, the Uzumaki spat in disgust. They ran out the stadium that way. Cowards. Jiraiya departed without another word. He liked the brat, but now, it was time to fry another 1 or 3. The 3 gigantic summoned snakes led the charge to the village wall, guided by the men riding them. Behind, Tora and the rest of his men followed them at a brisk pace. It wouldn't do to breach the enemy's walls, after all, only to be killed because you were too out of breath. The first hint of the plan gone terribly wrong came in the form of a large numbers of Konoha shinobi assembled atop the wall. From there, things went rapidly downhill. Sarutobi smiled at the look on Orochimaru's face as the latter's massive Karyu Enden sputtered out in a poof 3 feet from its creator. "Surprise, my idiotic apprentice," the third said jovially. He was really enjoying himself. It had been so long since he'd fought someone that he'd forgotten how good it felt. "The water you drank was tainted with one of Tsunade's special cocktails. Unless you have had the antidote, which I have, you won't be able to access or control chakra well." Orochimaru stared incomprehension. Sarutobi spat. "You thought I didn't know about your alliance with Suna? I knew all along. You didn't trap me, ignorant little snake. I trapped you." Orochimaru glared daggers. Could it be that the old retard was telling the truth? If so, then had Kabuto's fears been justified? He cursed himself for not listening to his right-hand man earlier. "So you think, sensei," he leered, sounding less confident than he had but a minute before. He regurgitated his kusanagi and brought it to guard position. "But reality is you're trapped inside this barrier with me. Your ANBU will never be able to break it in a million years. In the meanwhile, I should think myself capable of killing one crusty old fart even with a handicap." Sarutobi's smile was positively glowing. "But can you deal with 3 dozen ANBU in your condition?" he asked, zipping to the closest of the sound 4. Disregarding the danger of the inner barrier, he gathered a large amount of chakra in his left hand to overpower the shield and punched through it, driving a kunai into the back of the kunoichi's head with sufficient force to lodge the whole length of the blade inside her skull. Both barriers collapsed even as the third's arm blackened to a crisp. Orochimaru reached the Hokage then with a deft thrust at his teacher's kidney. Sarutobi jumped out of the way and assumed a stance even as his hand smoked and burned. The only sign that the flames hurt him was a slight grimace. Kabuto saw the barrier collapse and knew it was time to vamoose. It was this last disaster in a day full of disasters that convinced him of the futility of the whole enterprise. So, he feinted a charge at the 2 ANBU squared off against him and jetted out of the stadium like a rat fleeing a sinking ship. As he ran, his mind drifted back to the barrier and what it entailed for his mentor. He was sure that Orochimaru would survive this fiasco and shake off his pursuers. His master was one of the legendary Sannin, after all, but the third Hokage would survive. Kabuto's own chances were just as good if he survived past the walls. Baki knew he wasn't going to see another sunset. He was as elite Jounin, but 2 ANBU, the Jounin referee, the young Uchiha, his pink-haired teammate and of course, a never-ending supply of their blonde teammate making suicide runs and delivering high-powered ninjutsu at close ranges was beyond his ability by several miles and a few hundred yards. Still, he had nothing to lose and fought without care for personal welfare. For a few precious minutes, he was even able to hold his aggressors at bay. The end, when it came, was sudden. Throughout the course of the fight, Baki skillfully had avoided looking Sasuke directly in his eyes. One of Naruto's clones made yet another high-speed suicide aiming to run through his bleeding opponent with a ninjato appropriated from somewhere. It was as clumsy a sword attack as there ever was, Naruto never having trained with a blade, but the intent was clear and a sword wielded by an amateur hurts and kills just as well as one borne by a professional. Baki had every intention of making his enemies pay dearly and death by shadow clone was not how he planned to go. He used his superior experience and skill with the blade to impale the clone with a blade of wind that was so much sharper than any sword ever made. Naruto disintegrated in a close of smoke, unmasking Sasuke who was making an attack run of his own in the blonde's wake. For one brief moment, Baki's eyes met Sasuke's as the boy veered off to avoid a collision with an ANBU attacking the Tsunade Jounin from the side. As Neji had before, the Jounin found himself instantly ensnared in a genjutsu. Only whereas the Konoha Genin had his Byakugan to counter the Sharingan's lies with truth, the Tsunade Jounin had none. Caught in a web of nightmares, Baki staggered unexpectedly and what should have been a decapitating stroke missed by 1.5 miles as the ANBU blade bit into his shoulders. The pain brought the Jounin crashing out of the world of make-believe only to have Sakura deliver a chakra-coated palm strike to his heart that dropped him like a sack of potatoes. He did not get up. The root operator examined his target as would a sculptor, virgin rock. It was not Konoha's fault that the enemy had chosen to attack the section of the wall farthest from the Uchiha grounds. But a lot depended on the compound burning down in a fiery holocaust. Konoha had made big plans on that assumption and those plans could not be stymied simply because the enemy refused to cooperate. One burnt to a crisp Uchiha compound coming up. Orochimaru sensed the ANBU wave before he saw them. He darted to the side even as his 3 surviving guards, they did not know it, but they were now the unofficial sacrificial rearguard, moved to engage his pursuers. Hopefully, his 3 protégés would delay the Leaf ANBU long enough and buy him the time he needed to make his escape. Sadly, it was not to be. Sarutobi somehow summoned Enma with his blistered arms and the big monkey body tackled Jiraiya. As Monkey King and Strongman went down in a tumble, it created a big hole on the line for Orochimaru's pursuers to exploit. ANBU poured forth and the Sannin was forced to dodge to the side as one took a pot shot with a Karyu Enden. The Sannin saw Kadamaru fall next, overwhelmed by sheer numbers, and the wave of ANBU became a tide. Sakan and Yukon were washed away seconds later under that same charge, and Jiraiya suffered from a terminal case of slit throat as a passing ANBU took a moment to finish him as he lay broken on the roof. Orochimaru knew that the situation was as bad as any he'd ever faced, but surrender was not an option. Not within Konoha's walls. He stabbed his first assailant in the abdomen and cut off the offending arm of the next ANBU that got too close to him. Then he screamed aloud as Sarutobi, who'd also joined the fight, came in low from the side and swung the Enma staff, shattering his student's knee. Orochimaru fell on his broken and bent knee, which made him scream even louder. An ANBU took the opportunity to sever the muscles on his right shoulder, removing the Sannin's ability to use his arm. On his knees, deprived of the ability to use a weapon and unable to flee, there was no escape for even a Sannin after that. Temari and Kankuro fled as fast as their legs could carry them. They did not know it, but with Jiraiya on their tail, their cause was a lost one. To their credit, they managed to reach the forest before he intercepted their little group. "So here we are," Jiraiya said, blocking the path, 2 genin against a Sannin. "Think you can escape?" Temari gripped her fan tighter. With her younger brother wounded so badly, their tactical situation was impossible and could have only one outcome. They were so dead. Semi-conscious, Gaara groaned at that moment and vomited blood on Kankuro's shoulder. "Your brother is severely wounded. Surrender and I'll ensure Konoha does everything we can to save him. You two will be treated well." Temari looked undecided. She cast a sideways glance to her sociopath younger brother, who despite having threatened to kill her so many times was still kin. Gaara's life was hanging by a thread. Jiraiya moved, sensing indecision. His fist appeared as if by magic in Temari's stomach. As she folded over, a simple kick to Kankuro's leg broke his knee and destroyed his mobility. Kankuro shouted and started to fall, but the Sannin was there. Holding the puppeteer's arms hostage, Jiraiya lowered both the boy and his precious cargo to the ground. In his condition, the Kazekage's youngest might die if he hit the dirt hard, and the third student had no intention of fighting a tailed beast if it could be avoided. The Sannin knocked out the Jinchuriki's siblings and went to work. He opened the seal scroll he'd prepared after the meeting with Koharu and spread it on the ground. He gingerly lifted the Jinchuriki and placed him on the array spread. Then, he gathered chakra in his right hand, and running through the invoking seals, slammed it on the boy's chest. Gaara screamed and after a second, fell unconscious from the blow and the technique, but by that time the seal had activated. Jiraiya watched the unconscious Jinchuriki closely for a couple of seconds and nodded. The boy might die even now, but if that happened, the one tail would only exchange one prison for another. Then, with the tailed beast secured for the nonce and the Jinchuriki's siblings knocked out for the count, he summoned 2 Battletoads and sent them to Konoha for reinforcements and medics. He looked at the sky and thought, it is a fine day. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. Make sure to like and subscribe, and don't forget to share this video with your friends. Guys, make sure to help the author by visiting the link in the description. This is Fox Sage, and I'm signing off.